Yes. Alright, I think we're live and in color. Let me just make sure that YouTube is also up and running. Bingo, there we go. Alright, yes, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and good night, everybody. I'm here again with more Don Quixote, as was promised, on yesterday. Let's see here, what else do we have? Well, I suppose, at least for me, I'll at least get a little bit of yabbing out of the way. Also, terribly sorry I was late again. I was dealing with food, because, turns out, I'm out of eggs, which is a little unfortunate. So I've got some things to go shopping for once I'm done and dusted with my reading today. But anyhow, let's see here. What else have I been up to? Well, it was the darndest thing is that I was lamenting the state of my pantry when I hear this thonk thonking on the window, and I look out and there's a finch that's just pecking at the window, and I'm like, oh, okay. I guess he was having the time of his life, as you know. I'm sure you're aware. But luckily, though, I've got water, and I'm looking through my big book of recipes. I'm just gonna get I'll probably keep jibber jabbering for about like 6 odd minutes while I'm figuring out what my plan is, because I'm thinking. I have my actually, I'm a little curious if maybe this Food and Flavors of Haute Provence might have some type of a dessert for me. Let me see here. There's nuts, honey, and fruits. Index. Hold on, this might work. Herbes de Provence, Gruyere, figs. Something about cream. Surely they've got something about cream. The French love cream. If I'm not terribly mistaken. No, we go immediately from creamy mushroom soup to crepes. Granted, I could probably make crepes. Crepes could be a good idea. After all, with the using of the what's-a-batoozits with the heavy cream, I think you could probably do good crepes. Where is page 200? Crepe packets of nuts and dried fruits with rum. I would need prunes, apricots, raisins, toasted almonds, toasted hazelnuts, fig or apricot jam. I think I have apricot jam. It's a good question. I'll need to double check, but either way, I might also just check my La Cucina. The regional cooking of Italy. Let me see here. Yes, see. So we've got. Come on, there's got to be something about cream, right? Oop. Cherries, chicory. Never actually had chicory now that I'm thinking about it. Cream, curly endive. What? Wait, what? Really? Jump straight from crabs to curly endive? What is going on here? I guess it might just be milk. I mean, surely they've got something with milk. Okay, milk and cream are they're put into one thing. All right. What is a blancmange? I don't actually know. I'd wager it's some cousin of a mange too. But let me see here. There's also burned broth, which I don't think I'm going to stay over there. Maybe a milk fritter? Rice pudding, rum custard, vanilla panna cotta. Now there could be an idea. Let me check what the blancmange is. Thing's got like almost 1,000 pages strong, and admittedly there. Okay, well there's blancmange with amaretti. That one's mostly just eggs. Cream baskets maybe might be my 831 for 8 persons, which requires 1 recipe of pastry cream, which is 13 pages ahead, which I find a little bizarre, but not out of the realm of... What? Okay, so the pastry cream is 8 large egg yolks, so I'm definitely going to need a lot of eggs. 4 cups of whole milk, the zest of 1 lemon, ground cinnamon, cocoa powder. Oh, there's even more. Granted, that one's a layer cake. Ooh. Ooh, I could probably go with a layer cake. Hmm. 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 But yet it's not mentioned here on the page that explicitly requires it for the... How curious. Well, anyway. Yeah, let's see here. Of Pescara. I don't know where Pescara is. I do think I know where Abruzzo is. Because Abruzzo is... Abruzzo. I want to say it's a little east and north of Rome. Hold on, let me actually check here. Let me consult the wise and Abruzzo. By technicality, yes. It is a little east and north of Rome. I was correct. I've got my galaxy cap on today. Also, I will say is that I've been having quite a fun time. We're still working on the live 2D thingamahoos that I posted a little first foray into. Yeah, you know what? I think I'll bake a cake. Why not? Let's see here. Olive oil and all-purpose flour for the baking pan. That needs, like, I'm counting at least 18 eggs thus far. Yeah, 18 eggs, not counting the egg whites, which I could probably use, like, for a meringue, I suppose, or... I don't know, something. Maybe I could make macarons. Let me see here. Make the sponge cake, beat the yolks of the egg with the sugar and the flour. Okay, yeah, and then separate the eggs. Cook the egg whites stiff and fold them in. Pour the mixture into the pan and bake until set, about 40 minutes. Let cool completely in the pan for the pastry cream. Beat egg yolks and sugar. Mixture begins to thicken. Add lemon zest and half the cinnamon. Cook over low heat in a saucepan. Remove from the heat and let the pan until cool. Then make the chocolate cream. Whisk together the remaining half cup sugar, cocoa, and remaining cinnamon and mix in half of the pastry cream, whisking until blended. Set aside for the almond paste. Wow, there's a lot of stuff here. Finely ground blanched almonds. Well, I don't think I could sub in almond flour for that one. Interesting, though. Maybe there's some type of a Christmas cake. Actually, as I recall, I think there was a Christmas cake in my bread book. I need to go and double check on that one, but I have it. It's not here. It's elsewhere. It's in the house, mind you, but certainly ain't here. But anyway, let me it's a Tristine yeast cake, sponge cake, jam ravioli, bolognese mostarda. Bolognese mustard? Is a sweet style mostarda, fruit preserves in grape must. Mostarda di Carpi. Where the heck do I get mostarda di Carpi? Ham sweet ravioli. 1 cup of apricot jam, bolognese mostarda. At the center of each disc, place 1 teaspoon of the jam and 1 teaspoon of the mostarda. Fold the discs over and seal with the tines of a fork. Place on a baking sheet and bake until well browned. Sprinkle with confectioner's sugar and serve warm. So this is some breed of like a sweet. No, you fry pierogies. I guess these are just like little danishes, I guess. I'm not really sure. Where the hell am I gonna get? Hold on, let's see here. Actually, you know what? Now that I'm thinking about it, I'm pretty sure there's a there's an importer. Let's see here. Mostarda di Carpi. I certainly would like it. I don't think I'd want to get it, you know, shipped in from Emilia Romagna. Maybe. Let's see here. What is grape must? I guess I could, you know, no cookies, please. Oh, and it's also sold out, which is très terrible. An accompaniment that enhances typical. Interesting. Hold on, let's just see where I can fetch grape must. Grape must? Must is freshly crushed fruit juice. The solid portion of the must is called pomace, and okay, fascinating. Making must is the first step in wine making. Now the question is, where can I just get grape must? I didn't even know that apparently Macy's has a wine shop, which I suppose makes sense. A wine shop, not a Hawaiian shop. Golly gee willikers. Interesting. Anyway, I'll put this one up to a poll. We'll say I need to. I'm gonna figure some more things out. But either way, yes, everything I'd say is. I guess I could also make a limoncello. Flavor of high proof alcohol or milk fritters. I should probably make milk fritters. Actually, now that I'm looking at it, that needs like 4 cups of milk. I'm sure I'll find something to use all this heavy whipping cream for. But yeah, milk fritters, which is typical of Torricella and Montorio. Which consists of 1.5 cups sugar, 1 3/4 cup all-purpose flour, a pinch of ground cinnamon, the grated zest of 1 lemon, 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, 4 cups of milk, olive oil, 3 large egg whites, fine breadcrumbs, rum optional, and salt. And I don't think I even have any rum in the house. I'm mostly a fruity liqueur kind of guy. I like my chartreuse, specifically my yellow chartreuse. Wow, look at that one. It actually handled that one quite well. Maybe though it's because I was talking about liquors. But anyhow, what else am I up to? Beat the egg until stir in the vanilla and the milk, add in the milk mixture, and then you fry it until golden. Heat 2 inches of olive oil in a pan. Fry the fritters until golden and drain on the paper towels. Serve at room temperature. They are exceptional, drizzled with rum. That's on the side though. And this is milk fritters for 10 persons. You know what? Actually, hold on. Let me go and posit this one to the gang. Let's see here. There it is. have a dessert in mind for Wednesday. If not, I'm thinking milk fritters. Anyhow, all right. You just okay. We do have songs. It is just. Let me just. You know what? Actually, let me turn this up just a hair. A little bit. Yeah, I guess I'm thinking milk fritters. Do I have a bookmark anywhere here? Well, there's one. Yeah. Still remember back when GameStop had those Elite Pro thingamahoozits. That was a time. But anyway, just gonna pop that in there. And we're gonna call that there. Because the other thing that I'm doing today is I'm going to be making more. I just bumped my head into the mic stand. I am terribly sorry. I'm going to be making more pork kakuni. That's the that's the idea at least. Because I've still got the that reminds me. I need to go and make sure the broth isn't. I should probably go and take that off the simmer. I'll be right back. Just don't go anywhere. I'll be like 2 minutes. Let me just
go get some snacks. Perhaps a carbonated soda.
all right. Yes, I'm back. Good. Yeah. We're fine. Everything's all right. The broth will be good. Good. Still good. But anyhow, it seems like other people are trying to. Okay, anyhow. It's about high time that we actually, you know what? I'm just gonna have a little handful of these cranberries. Just give myself a little bit more vim and vigor. Just to have a little bit more. So, let's see here. Oh, make sure my little pop filter is facing the right way. Chapter 18 of what happened Don Quixote in the castle or house of the Knight of the Green Gaben, together with other matters out of the common. Don Quixote found Don Diego de Miranda's house built in village style, with his arms in rough stone over the street door. In the patio was the storeroom, and at the entrance the cellar, with plenty of wine jars standing round, which, coming from El Toboso, brought back to his memory his enchanted and transformed Dulcinea, and, with a sigh, and not thinking of what he was saying, or in whose presence he was, he exclaimed, "Oh, ye sweet treasures, to my sorrow found! Once sweet and welcome, 'twas heaven's goodwill. Oh, ye Tobosan jars, how ye bring back to my memory the sweet object of my bitter regrets." The student poet, Don Diego's son, who had come out with his mother to receive him, heard his exclamation, and both mother and son were filled with amazement at the extraordinary figure he presented. He, however, dismounting from Rocinante, advanced with great politeness to ask permission to kiss the lady's hand, while Don Diego said, "Signora, pray receive with your wonted kindness Signor Don Quixote of La Mancha, whom you see before you, a knight-errant and the bravest and wisest in the world." The lady, whose name was Dona Cristina, received him with every sign of goodwill and great courtesy, and Don Quixote placed himself at her service with an abundance of well-chosen and polished phrases. Almost the same civilities were exchanged between him and the student, who, listening to Don Quixote, took him to be a sensible, clear-headed person. Here the author describes minutely everything belonging to Don Diego's mansion, putting before us in his picture the whole contents of a rich gentleman farmer's house. But the translator of the history thought it best to pass over these and other details of the same sort in silence, as they are not in harmony with the main purpose of the story, the strong point of which is truth rather than dull digressions. They led Don Quixote into a room, and Sancho removed his armor, leaving him in loose walloon breeches and a chamois leather doublet, all stained with the rust of his armor. His collar was a falling one of scholastic cut, without starch or lace, his buskins buff-colored, and his shoes polished. He wore his good sword, which hung in a baldric of sea-wolf skin, for he had suffered for many years, they say, from an ailment of the kidneys. And over all he threw a long cloak of good grey cloth, but first of all with 5 or 6 buckets of water, for as regard the number of buckets there is some dispute. He washed his head and face, and still the water remained whey-colored, thanks to Sancho's greediness and purchase of those unlucky curds that had turned his masters so white. Thus arrayed, and with an easy, sprightly, and gallant air, Don Quixote passed into another room, where the student was waiting to entertain him while the table was being laid. For on the arrival of so distinguished a guest, Dona Cristina was anxious to show that she knew how and was able to give a becoming reception to those who came to her house. While Don Quixote was taking off his armor, Don Lorenzo, for so Don Diego's son was called, took the opportunity to say to his father, "What are we to make of this gentleman you have brought home to us, sir? For his name, his appearance, and your describing him as a knight-errant have completely puzzled my mother and me." "I don't know what to say, my son," replied Don Diego. "All I can tell thee is that I have seen him act the acts of the greatest madman in the world, and heard him make observations so sensible that they efface and undo all he does. Do thou talk to him and feel the pulse of his wits, and as thou art shrewd, from the most reasonable conclusion thou canst as to his wisdom or folly, though, to tell the truth, I am more inclined to take him to be mad than sane." With this, Don Lorenzo went away to entertain Don Quixote, as has been said, and in the course of the conversation that passed between them, Don Quixote said to Don Lorenzo, "Your father, Señor Don Diego de Miranda, has told me of the rare abilities and subtle intellect you possess, and above all, that you are a great poet." "A poet it may be," replied Don Lorenzo, "but a great one by no means. It is true that I am somewhat given to poetry and to reading good poets, but not so much as to justify the title of great which my father gives me." "Oh, I do not dislike that modesty," said Don Quixote, "for there is no poet who is not conceited and does not think he is the best poet in the world." "Oh, there is no rule without an exception," said Don Lorenzo. "There may be some who are poets and yet do not think they are." "Oh, very few," said Don Quixote. "But tell me, what verses are those which you have now in hand, and which your father tells me you keep, and which your father tells me keep you somewhat restless and absorbed? If it be some gloss, I know something about glosses. I should like to hear them, and if they are for a poetical tournament, contrive to carry off the second prize, for the first always goes by favor or personal standing, the second by simple justice, and so the third comes to be the second, and the first, reckoning in this way, will be third, in the same way as licentiate degrees are conferred at universities, but for all that, the title of first is a great distinction." "Oh, so far," said Don Lorenzo to himself, "I should not take you to be a madman, but let us go on." So he said to him, "Your worship has apparently attended the schools. What sciences have you studied?" "That of knight-errantry," said Don Quixote, "which is as good as that of poetry, or even a finger or two above it." "I do not know what science that is," said Don Lorenzo, "and until now I have never heard of it." "It is a science," said Don Quixote, "that comprehends in itself all or most of the sciences in the world, for he who professes it must be a jurist, and must know the rules of justice, distributive and equitable, so as to give to each one what belongs to him and is due to him. He must be a theologian, so as to be able to give a clear and distinct reason for the Christian faith he professes, wherever it may be asked of him. He must be a physician, and above all, a herbalist, so as in wastes and solitudes to know the herbs and have the property of that have the property of healing wounds. For a knight-errant must not go looking for someone to cure him at every step. He must be an astronomer, so as to know by the stars how many hours of the night have passed, and what clime and quarter of the world he is in. He must know mathematics, for at every turn some occasion for them will present itself to him, and putting it aside that he must be adorned with all the virtues, cardinal and theological, to come down to minor particulars, he must, I say, be able to swim as well as Nicholas or Nicolo the fish could. As the story goes, he must know how to shoe a horse, and repair his saddle and bridle, and to return to higher matters, he must be faithful to God and his lady. He must be pure in thought, decorous in words, generous in works, valiant in deeds, patient in suffering, compassionate towards the needy, and lastly an upholder of the truth, though its defense should cost him his life. Of all these qualities, great and small, it is a true knight-errant made up. Judge then, Señor Don Lorenzo, whether it is to be a contemptible science which the knight who studies and professes it has to learn, and whether it may not compare with the very loftiest that are taught in the schools." "Well, if that be so," replied Don Lorenzo, "this science, I protest, surpasses all." How, if that be so?" said Don Quixote. "What I mean to say," said Don Lorenzo, "is that I doubt whether there are now, or ever were, any knights-errant and adorned with such virtues." Many a time, replied Don Quixote, have I said what I say now once what I now say once more, that the majority of the world are of an opinion that there were never any knights errant in it. And as it is my opinion that, unless heaven by some miracle brings home to them the truth that there were and are, all the pains one takes will be in vain, as experience has often proved to me. I will not now stop to disabuse you of the error you share with the multitude. All I shall do is to pray to heaven to deliver you from it, and show you how beneficial and necessary knights-errant were in days of yore, and how useful they would be in these days were they but in vogue. But now, for the sins of the people, sloth and indolence, gluttony and luxury are triumphant. Our guest is broken out of our hands, said Don Lorenzo to himself at this point, but for all that he is a glorious madman, and I should be a dull blockhead to doubt it. Here, being summoned to dinner, they brought their colloquy to a close. Don Diego asked his son what he had been able to make out as to the wits of their guest, to which he replied, all the doctors and clever scribes in the world will not make sense of the scrawl of his madness. He is a madman full of streaks, full of lucid intervals. They went in to dinner, and the repast was such as Don Diego said on the road he was in the habit of giving to his guests, neat, plentiful, and tasty. But what pleased Don Quixote most was the marvelous silence that reigned throughout the house, for it was like a Carthusian monastery. When the cloth had been removed, grace said, and their hands washed, Don Quixote earnestly pressed Don Lorenzo to repeat to him his verses for the poetical tournament, to which he replied, not to be like those poets who, when they are asked to recite their verses, refuse, and when they are not asked for them, vomit them up. I will repeat my gloss, for which I do not expect any prize, having composed it merely as an exercise of ingenuity. A discerning friend of mine, said Don Quixote, was of opinion that no one ought to waste labor in glossing verses, and the reason he gave was that the gloss can never come up to the text, and that often or most frequently it wanders away from the meaning and purpose aimed at in the glossed lines, and besides that the laws of the gloss were too strict, as they did not allow interrogations, nor said he, nor I say, nor turning verbs into nouns, or altering the construction, not to speak of the other restrictions and limitations that fetter gloss writers, as you no doubt know. Verily, Signor Don Quixote, said Don Lorenzo, I wish I could catch your worship tripping at a stretch, but I cannot, for you slip through my fingers like an eel. I don't understand what you say or mean by slipping, said Don Quixote. I will explain myself another time, said Don Lorenzo. For the present pray attend to the glossed verses, and the gloss which runs thus. Could was become an is for me, then I would ask no more than this, or could for me the time that is become the time that is to be. Gloss. Dame Fortune once upon a day to me was bountiful and kind, but all things changed, she changed her mind, and what she gave she took away. O Fortune, long I've sued to thee, the gifts thou givest me restore, for trust me I would ask no more, could was become and is for me. No other prize I seek to gain, no triumph, glory, or success, only the long-lost happiness, the memory whereof is pain. One taste, methinks, of bygone bliss, the heart-consuming fire might stay, and so it come without delay. Then I would ask no more than this. I ask what cannot be, alas! The time should ever be, and then come back to us, and be again, no power on earth can bring to pass. For fleet of foot is he, I wis. I wis? Weiss? Maybe it's Wes. I don't know. And idly therefore do we pray, that what for aye hath left us may become for us the time that is. Perplexed and certain to remain twixt hope and fear is death, not life. 'Twere better sure to end the strife, and dying seek release from pain, and yet thought it were the best for me. Anon the thought aside I fling, and to the present fondly cling, and dread the time that is to be. Whiz. Hold on, let me check that one real quick. Whiz. The definition. to know or suppose I whiz. Does it have the
Whis.
Okay, it is whiz. Anyway. Sorry, I was taken by the moment. Hold on, give me just a second. Anyhow, let me see here. When Don Lorenzo had finished reciting his gloss, Don Quixote stood up and, in a loud voice, almost a shout, exclaimed as he grasped Don Lorenzo's right hand in his, "By the highest heavens, noble youth, but you are the best poet on earth, and deserve to be crowned with laurel not by Cyprus or by Gaeta, as a certain poet, God forgive him, said, but by the academies of Athens, if they still flourished, and by those that flourish now, Paris, Bologna, Salamanca. Heaven grant the judges who rob you of the first prize, that Phoebus may pierce them with his arrows, and the muses never cross the thresholds of their doors. Repeat me some of your long measure verses, Signor, if you will be so good, for I want thoroughly to feel the pulse of your rare genius." Is there any need to say that Don Lorenzo enjoyed hearing himself praised by Don Quixote, albeit he looked upon him as a madman? Power of flattery, how far-reaching art thou, and how wide are the bounds of thy pleasant jurisdiction? Don Lorenzo gave a proof of it, for he complied with Don Quixote's request and entreaty, and repeated to him this sonnet of the fable or story of Pyramus and Thisbe. The lovely maid, she pierces now the wall, heart pierced by her young Pyramus doth lie, and love spreads wings from Cyprus isle to fly. A chink to view so wondrous great and small, their silence speaketh, for no voice at all can pass so straight a strait, but love will ply, where to all other power 'twas vain to try. For love will find a way whate'er befall. There we go. Impatient of delay, with reckless pace, the rash maid wins the fatal spot where she sinks not in lover's arms, but death's embrace. So runs the strange tale, how the lovers twain, one sword, one sepulchre, one memory, slays and entombs and brings to life again. "Oh, blessed be God," said Don Quixote, when he heard Don Lorenzo's sonnet, that among the hosts these are of irritable poets, I have found one consummate one, which, Signor, the art of this sonnet proves to me that you are." For 4 days was Don Quixote most sumptuously entertained in Don Diego's house, at the end of which time he asked his permission to depart, telling him he thanked him for the kindness and hospitality he had received in his house, but that, as it did not become knights-errant to give themselves up for long to idleness and luxury, he was anxious to fulfill the duties of his calling in seeking adventures, of which he was informed there was an abundance in that neighborhood, where he hoped to employ his time until the day came round for the jousts at Saragossa. For that was his proper destination, and that first of all he meant to enter the cave of Montesinos. Montesinos. Of which so many marvelous things were reported all through the country, and at the same time to investigate and explore the origin and true source of the 7 lakes commonly called the Lakes of Ruidera. Don Diego and his son commended his laudable resolution, and bade him furnish himself with all he wanted from their house and belongings, as they would most gladly be of service to him, which indeed his personal worth and his honorable profession made incumbent upon them. The day of his departure came at length, as welcome to Don Quixote as it was sad and sorrowful to Sancho Panza, who was very well satisfied with the abundance of Don Diego's house, and objected to return to the starvation of the woods and wilds and the short commons of his ill-stocked Alforjas. These, however, he filled and packed with what he considered needful. On taking leave, Don Quixote said to Don Lorenzo, "I know not whether I have told you already, but if I have to tell you once more, that if you wish to spare yourself fatigue and toil in reaching the inaccessible summit of the Temple of Fame, you have nothing to do but to turn aside out of the somewhat narrow path of poetry, and take the still narrower one of knight-errantry, wide enough, however, to make you an emperor in the twinkling of an eye. In this speech, Don Quixote wound up the evidence of his madness, but still better in what he had added when he said, God knows I would gladly take Don Lorenzo with me to teach him how to spare the humble and trample the proud underfoot. Virtues are the part and parcel of the profession I belong to, but since his tender age does not allow for it, nor his praiseworthy pursuits permit it, I will simply content myself with impressing it upon your worship that you will become famous as a poet if you are guided by the opinion of others, rather than by the opinion of your own. Rather than by your own, because no fathers or mothers ever think their own children ill-favored, and this sort of deception prevails still more strongly in the case of the children of the brain. Both father and son were amazed afresh at the strange medley Don Quixote talked. At one moment sense, at another nonsense, and at the pertinacity and persistence he displayed in going through thick and thin in quest of his unlucky adventures, which he made the end and aim of his desires. There was a renewal of offers of service and civilities, and then, with the gracious permission of the lady of the castle, they took their departure, Don Quixote on Rocinante, and Sancho on Dapple. Pertinacity. I assume that it's got its roots in pertinent. Pertinacity. The quality of being pertinacious, persistence. Okay. Pertinacious, holding tenaciously to a purpose, course of action, or opinion, resolute, stubborn, or obstinate, extremely or objectionably persistent. I see. How fascinating indeed. Let's see here. How is my bitrate? Looks like bitrate's pretty healthy. We've got a fair few going in. Let us continue then, shall we? Chapter 19, in which is related the adventure of the enamored shepherd, together with other truly droll incidents. Don Quixote had gone but a short distance beyond Don Diego's village when he fell in with a couple of either priests or students and a couple of peasants mounted on 4 beasts of the ass kind. One of the students carried, wrapped up in a piece of green buckram by way of a portmanteau, what seemed to be a little linen and a couple of pairs of ribbed stockings. The other carried nothing but a pair of new fencing foils with buttons. The peasants carried drivers' articles that showed that they were on their way from some large town where they had bought them, and were taking them home to their village, and both students and peasants were struck with the same amazement that everybody felt who saw Don Quixote for the first time, and were dying to know who this man, so different from ordinary men, could be. Don Quixote saluted them, and after ascertaining that their road was the same as his, made them an offer of his company, and begged them to slacken their pace, as their young asses traveled faster than his horse. And then, to gratify them, he told them in a few words who he was, and the calling and profession he followed, which was that of a knight-errant seeking adventures in all parts of the world. He informed them that his own name was Don Quixote of La Mancha, and that he was called, by way of surname, the Knight of the Lions. All this was Greek or gibberish to the peasants, but not so to the students, who very soon perceived the crack in Don Quixote's pate? For all that, however, they regarded him with admiration and respect, and one of them said to him, If you, Sir Knight, have no fixed road, as it is the way of those who seek adventures not to have any, let your worship come with us. You will see one of the finest and richest weddings that up to this day have ever been celebrated in La Mancha, or for many a league round. Don Quixote asked him if it was some prince's, then he spoke of it in this way. Oh, not at all, said the student. It is the wedding of a farmer and a farmer's daughter. He is the richest in all the country, and she the fairest mortal ever set eyes on. The display of which is to be attended will be something rare and out of the common, for it will be celebrated at a meadow adjoining the town of the bride, who is called par excellence Quiteria the fair, as the bridegroom is called Camacho the rich. She is 18 and he 22, and they are fairly matched, though some knowing ones, they all have the pedigrees in the world by heart. Will have it that the familiarity of the fair Quiteria is better than Camacho's. But no one minds that nowadays, for wealth can solder a great many flaws. At any rate, Camacho is free-handed, and it is his fancy to screen the whole meadow with boughs and cover it in overhead, so that the sun will have a hard work if he tries to get in to reach the grass that covers the soil. He has provided dancers, too, not only of the sword, but also bell dancers. For in his own town there are those who ring the changes and jingle the bells to perfection. Of shoe dancers I say nothing, for of them he has engaged a host. But none of these things, nor of the many others I have omitted to mention, will do more to make this a memorable wedding than the part which I suspect the despairing Basilio will play in it. This Basilio is a youth of the same village as Quiteria, and he lived in the house next door to that of her parents, of which circumstance love took advantage to reproduce to the word the forgotten loves of Pyramus and Thisbe. For Basilio loved Quiteria from his earliest years, and she responded to his passion with countless modest proofs of affection, so that the loves of the two children, Basilio and Quiteria, were the talk and amusement of the town. As they grew up, the father of Quiteria made up his mind to refuse Basilio his wonted freedom of access to the house, and to relieve himself of the constant doubts and suspicions, he arranged a match for his daughter with the rich Camacho, as he did not approve of her marrying Basilio, who did not so large a share of the gifts of fortune as of nature. For, if the truth be told ungrudgingly, he is the most agile youth we know, a mighty thrower of the bar, a first-rate wrestler, and a great ball player. He runs like a deer and leaps better than a goat, bowls over the 9 pins as if by magic, sings like a lark, and plays the guitar so as to make it speak, and above all handles a sword as well as the best. Aye, for that excellence alone, said Don Quixote at this, the youth deserves to marry, not merely the fair Quiteria, but Queen Guinevere herself, were she alive now, in spite of Launcelot, and all who would try to prevent it. Oh, say that to my wife, said Sancho, who had until now listened in silence, for she won't hear of anything but each one marrying his equal, holding the proverb each ewe to her like. What I would like is that this good Basilio, for I am beginning to take a fancy to him already, should marry this lady Quiteria, and a blessing and good luck, I meant to say the opposite, on people who would prevent those who love one another from marrying. If all those who love one another were to marry, said Don Quixote, it would deprive parents of the right to choose, and marry their children to the proper person and at the proper time. And if it was left to daughters to choose husbands as they please, one would be choosing her father's servant, and another someone she has seen passing in the street and fancies gallant and dashing, though he may be a drunken bully, for love and fancy easily blind the eyes of the judgment. So much wanted in choosing one's way of life, and the matrimonial choice is very liable to error, and it needs great caution and the special favor of heaven to make it a good one. He who has to make a long journey will, if he is wise, look out for some trusty and pleasant companion to accompany him before he sets out. Why then should he not do the same? Who has to make the whole journey of life down to the final halting place of death, more especially when the companion has to be his companion in bed, at board, and everywhere, as the wife is to her husband. The companionship of one's wife is no article of merchandise that, after it has been bought, may be returned or bartered or changed, for it is an inseparable accident that lasts as long as life lasts. It is a noose that, once you put it round your neck, turns into a Gordian knot, which, if the scythe of death does not cut it, then there is no untying. I could say a great deal more on this subject were I not prevented by the anxiety I feel now to know if the senior licentiate has anything more to tell about the story of Basilio. To this the student, bachelor, or as Don Quixote called him, licentiate, replied, I have nothing whatever to say further, but that from the moment Basilio heard that the fair Quiteria was to be married to Camacho the rich, he has never been seen to smile or heard to utter rational word, and he always goes about moody and dejected, talking to himself in a way that shows plainly he is out of his senses. He eats little and sleeps little, and all he eats is fruit. And when he sleeps, if he sleeps at all, it is in the field on the hard earth like a brute beast. Sometimes he gazes at the sky, at other times he fixes his eyes on the earth in such an abstracted way that he might be taken for a clothed statue, with its drapery stirred by the wind. In short, he shows he shows such signs of a heart crushed by suffering that we all know him believe that all we who know him believe that when tomorrow the fair Quiteria says yes, it will be his sentence of death. God will guide it better, said Sancho. For God, who gives the wound, gives the salve. Nobody knows what will happen. There are a good many hours between this and tomorrow, and any one of them, or any moment, the house may fall. I have seen the rain coming down and the sun shining all at one time. Many a one goes to bed in good health who can't stir the next day, and tell me, is there anyone who can boast of having driven a nail into the wheel of fortune? Faith, and between a woman's yes and no, I wouldn't venture to put the point of a pin, for there would not be room for it. If you tell me Quiteria loves Basilio, heart and soul, then I'll give him a bag of good luck. For love, I have heard say, looks through spectacles that make copper seem gold, poverty, wealth, and bleary eyes, pearls. What art thou driving at, Sancho? Oh, curses on thee, said Don Quixote. For when thou takest to stringing proverbs and saying together, no one can understand thee but Judas himself, and I wish he had thee. Tell me, thou animal, what dost thou know about nails or wheels or anything else? Oh, if you don't understand me, replied Sancho, it is no wonder my words are taken for nonsense. But no matter, I understand myself, and I know that I have not said anything very foolish in what I have said. Only your worship, señor, is always graveling at everything I say, nay, everything I do. Cavilling, not graveling, said Don Quixote. Thou prevaricator of honest language, God confound thee. No, don't find fault with me, your worship, returned Sancho. For you know I have not been bred up at court or trained at Salamanca, to know whether I am adding or dropping a letter or so in my words. Why, God bless me, it is not fair to force a Sayago man to speak like a Toledan. Maybe there are Toledans who do not hit it off when it comes to polished talk. That is true, said the licentiate. For those who have been bred up in the tanneries and the Zocodover cannot talk like those who are almost all day pacing the cathedral cloisters, and yet they are all Toledans. What is a Zocodover? Hold on, we have to know. Zocodover is apparently a square in Toledo, and that's about that. Interesting. I'm going to assume the same thing of the tanneries. Either that or it's more like the leather tanning, which are usually on the outskirts because they stink. Because you have to use a lot of ammonia to properly tan leather. Or you have to chew it. And you have to chew it a lot. Because I'm not really familiar with the exact chemical process, but basically there's something in human saliva that ends up when you're gnawing on the leather, it ends up tanning it, which is cool. Might have to go and look into that one of these days. But anyhow, where was I? Pure, correct, elegant, and lucid language will be met with in men of courtly breeding and discrimination, though they have not been born in Mahalahanda. Mahalahanda? Yeah, I say of discrimination, because there are many who are not so, and the discrimination in the grammar of good language, if it be accompanied by practice, I, sirs, for my sins have studied canon law at Salamanca, and I rather pique myself on expressing my meaning in clear, plain, and intelligible language. If it did not pique yourself more on your dexterity with those foils you carry than on dexterity of tongue, said the other student, you would have been head of the degrees where you are now tail. Oh, look here, Bachelor Corchuelo, returned the licentiate. You have the most mistaken idea in the world about skill with the sword, if you think it useless. It is no idea on my part, but an established truth, replied Corchuelo. If you wish me to prove it to you by experiment, you have swords there, and it is a good opportunity. I have a steady hand and a strong arm, and these, joined with my resolution, which is not small, will make you confess that I am not mistaken. Dismount and put in practice your positions and circles and angles and sides. For I hope to make you see stars at noonday with my rude, raw swordsmanship, in which next to God I place my trust that the man is yet to be born who will make me turn my back. And that there is not one in the world I will not compel to give ground. As to whether you turn your back or not, I do not concern myself, replied the master of fence. Though it might be that your grave would be dug on the spot where you planted your foot the first time. I mean that you should be stretched dead there for despising skill with the sword. We shall soon see, replied Corchuelo, and getting off his ass briskly, he drew out furiously one of the swords the licentiate carried on his beast. Oh, it must not be that way, said Don Quixote at this point. I will be the director of this fencing match, and judge of this often disputed question. And dismounting from Rocinante and grasping his lance, he planted himself in the middle of the road, just as the licentiate, with an easy, graceful bearing and step, advanced towards Corchuelo, who came on against him, darting fire from his eyes, as the saying is. Darting fire from his eyes. Hold on. Here. We'll just mark that there. Darting fire from his eyes. Yeah, I'm just going to assume that we're just talking about rage. Or wrath, as they are wont to say. As the saying is. The other two of the company, the peasants, without dismounting from their asses, served as spectators of the mortal tragedy. The cuts, thrusts, downstrokes, backstrokes, and doubles that Corchuelo delivered were past counting, and came thicker than hops or hail. He attacked like an angry lion, but he was met by a tap on the mouth from the button of the licentiate's sword that checked him in the midst of his furious onset, and made him kiss it as if it were a relic, though not as devoutly as relics are and ought to be kissed. The end of it was that the licentiate reckoned up for him by thrusts every one of the buttons of the short cassock he wore, tore the skirts into strips, and, like the tails of a cuttlefish, knocked off his hat twice, and so completely tired him out that in vexation, anger, and rage he took the sword by the hilt and flung it away with such force that one of the peasants that were there, who was a notary and who went for it, made an affidavit afterwards that he sent it nearly 3/4 of a league, which testimony will serve and has served to show and establish with all certainty that strength is overcome by skill. How much is a league? Hold on, I need to make sure. I think it's like 750 meters. Or rather, like 3/4 of a league. 3 statute miles. So 3/4 of a league would be, let's see here. So that was 4.8 kilometers. Okay, hold on. How far is a league on length? A league is most commonly defined as 3 miles. Okay, hold on. Let's break out our calculator real quick. Hold on here. So we've got, yeah, because, you know, like 3 divided by 4. I don't know why I felt the need to... Yeah, he basically threw it like 2.25 miles. At least that's what the book's telling me. And it says they got proof. Anyway. Man, it's been a hot minute since I've actually gone sword fighting. I think I still have my old rapier somewhere around here. Well, either way. Actually, though, I'm thinking, if I ended up getting any kind of sword... Hold on, I need to finish this. Corchuelo sat down wearied, and Sancho, approaching him, said, "By my faith, Señor Bachelor, if your worship takes my advice, you will never challenge anyone to fence again, only to wrestle and throw the bar, for you have the youth and strength for that. But as for these fences, as they call them, I have heard that they can put the point of a sword through the eye of a needle." "I am satisfied with having tumbled off my donkey," said Corchuelo, "and with having had the truth I was so ignorant of proved to me by experience." And getting up, he embraced the licentiate, and they were better friends than ever, and not caring to wait for the notary, who had gone for the sword, As they saw he would be a long time about it, they resolved to push on so as to reach the village of Quiteria, to which they all belonged in good time. During the remainder of the journey, the licentiate held forth to them on the excellences of the sword, with such conclusive arguments and such figures and mathematical proofs that all were convinced of the value of the science, and Corchuelo cured of his dogmatism. It grew dark, but before they reached the town it seemed to them as if there was a heaven full of countless glittering stars in front of it. They heard, too, the unpleasant mingled notes of a variety of instruments, flutes, drums, psalteries, pipes, tabors, and timbrels, and as they drew near they perceived that the trees of a leafy arcade had been constructed at the entrance of the town were filled with the lights unaffected by the wind, for the breeze at the time was so gentle that it had not the power to stir the leaves on the trees. The musicians were the life of the wedding, wandering through the pleasant grounds in separate bands, some dancing, others singing, others playing with the various instruments already mentioned. In short, it seemed as though mirth and gaiety were frisking and gambling all over the meadow. Several other persons were engaged in erecting raised benches, from which people might conveniently see plays and dances that were to be performed the next day on the spot dedicated to the celebration of the marriage of Camacho the Rich and the obsequies of Basilio. Don Quixote would not enter the village, although the peasant as well as the bachelor pressed him. He excused himself, however, on the grounds amply sufficient in his opinion that it was custom of knights-errant to sleep in the fields and roads in preference to towns, even were it under gilded ceilings, and so turned aside a little out of the road, very much against Sancho's will, as the good quarters he had enjoyed in the castle or house of Don Diego came back to his mind. But anyway, yeah, it's been a hot minute since I've actually gone fencing, though granted what I usually ended up doing was more of a Venetian style, mostly because it would made good leverage of my what's the word, of the length of my limbs. Though I suppose, though, I mean, I actually am a little curious. Maybe there are books on. Would that be Salamancan fencing? Hold on, you know what? Salamancan fencing. No, I'm not talking about. But then I suppose it would be the Spanish fencing. Destreza! You know what? That makes a lot more sense, because then you've got the, yeah. Imre Vas. Interesting. A Verdadera Destreza, volumes 1, 2, and 3. First two volumes. Interesting. suppose those will be things to look at later. Anyway, hold on, let me actually have another quick sippy. Chapter 20, wherein an account is given of the wedding of Camacho the rich, together with the incident of Basilio the poor. Oh boy. Hold on, I need to... Delicious. Cold. Scarce had the fair Aurora given bright Phoebus time to dry the liquid pearls upon her golden locks with the heat of his fervent rays, when Don Quixote, shaking off sloth from his limbs, sprang to his feet and called to his squire Sancho, who was still snoring. Seeing which Don Quixote, ere he roused him thus, addressed him. Happy thou, above all the dwellers on the face of the earth, that without envying or being envied sleepest with tranquil mind, and that neither enchanters persecute nor enchantments affright. Sleep, I say, and will say 100 times, without any jealous thoughts of thy mistress to make thee keep thy ceaseless vigils, or any cares as to how thou art to pay the debts thou owest. Debts thou owest, not debts. Or find tomorrow's food for thyself and thy needy little family to interfere with thy repose. Ambition breaks not thy rest, nor doth this world's empty pomp disturb thee, for the utmost reach of thy anxiety is to provide for thy ass, since upon my shoulders thou hast laid the support of thyself, and the counterpoise and burden that nature and custom have imposed upon masters. The servant sleeps, and the master lies awake, thinking how he is to feed him, advance him, and reward him. The distress of seeing the sky turn brazen, and withhold its needful moisture from the earth, it is not felt by the servant, but by the master, who in time of scarcity and famine must support him who has served him in times of plenty and abundance. To all this Sancho made no reply, because he was asleep. Nor would he have wakened up so soon as he did, had not Don Quixote brought him to his senses with the butt of his lance. He woke at last, drowsy and lazy, and casting his eyes about in every direction, observed, "Oh, there comes, if I don't mistake, from the corner of that arcade is steam and a smell a great deal like fried rashers than galangale or thyme. A wedding what begins with smells like that, why, by faith, ought to be plentiful and unstinting." What is galangale? Galangale? Hold on. Galingale is a Eurasian sedge with an aromatic rhizome formerly used in perfumes. It's also a variant spelling of galangal, which is... oh, hold on. No, there's galangal, which is a plant in the ginger family, but then there's also Cyperus longus. So if it was galangale, however, where is galangal? Let's see here. If at the time, Southeast Asian cuisine. Okay, so I assume they're talking more about a sweet cyperus or water rush. I think. Yeah, they must be talking about this is something like a Cypress longus. Anyway, sorry, I got a little distracted. So apparently galangal is a cousin of ginger. That is quite tasty, at least from what I've seen. Now, what else was I looking at? What is a fried rasher? Fried rasher is a slice of thin bacon or ham that's been fried or boiled. Oh, yeah. I've actually got some. I've got some pork belly thawing. I think when that's done, I think I'm gonna maybe, yeah, we'll use like half of it for the pork cockony, and then I think I might just make some strips of bacon. Oh, that sounds like a great idea, me. I'm so smart. Anyway, where was I? Have done, thou glutton, said Don Quixote. Come, let us go and witness this bridal, and see what the rejected Basilio does. Let him do what he likes, returned Sancho. Sorry, returned Sancho. Be he not poor, he would marry Quiteria to make a grand match for himself. And he without a farthing, is there nothing else? Faith, senor, it is my opinion that the poor man should be content with what he can get, and not go looking for dainties in the bottom of the sea. I will bet my arm that Camacho could bury Basilio and Reals, and if that be so, as no doubt it is, what a fool Quiteria would be to refuse the fine dresses and jewels Camacho must have given her and will give her. And take Basilio's bar throwing and sword play. They won't give a pint of wine at the tavern for a good cast of the bar or a neat thrust of the sword. Talents and accomplishments that can't be turned into money, let Count de Rilos have them. But when such gifts fall to one that is hard cash, I wish my condition of life was as becoming as they are. On a good foundation you can raise a good building, and the best foundation in the world is money. For God's sake, Sancho, said Don Quixote here, stop that harangue. It is my belief, if thou wert allowed to continue all thou beginnest every instant, thou wouldst have no time left for eating or sleeping, for thou wouldst spend it all in talking. If your worship has a good memory, replied Sancho, you would remember the articles of our agreement before we separated from home this last time. One of them was that I was to be let to say all I liked, so long as it was not against my neighbor or your worship's authority, and so far it seems to me I have not broken that said article. I remember no such article, Sancho, said Don Quixote, and even if it were so, I desire you to hold your tongue and come along, for the instruments we heard last night are already beginning to enliven the valleys again. And no doubt the marriage will take place in the cool of the morning, and not in the heat of the afternoon. Oh no, actually. Sancho did as his master bade him, and putting the saddle on Rocinante and the pack saddle on Dapple, they both mounted and at a leisurely pace entered the arcade. The first thing that presented itself to Sancho's eyes was a whole ox spitted on a whole elm tree, and in the fire is to be roasted there was burning a middle-sized mountain of faggots, and 6 stew pots that stood round the blaze had not been made in the ordinary mold of common pots, for they were 6 half-wine jars, each fit to hold the contents of a slaughterhouse. They swallowed up whole sheep and hid them away in their insides without showing any more sign of them than if they were pigeons. Countless were the hares already skinned and the plucked fowls that hung on the trees for burial in the pots. Numberless the wild fowl and game of various sorts suspended from the branches, that the air might keep them cool. Sancho counted more than 60 wineskins of over 6 gallons each, and all filled, as it proved afterwards, with generous wines. There were, besides the pile of the whitest bread, like heaps of corn one sees on threshing floors. There was a wall made of cheeses arranged to look like open brickwork, and 2 cauldrons full of oil, bigger than those of a dyer's shop, served for cooking fritters, which when fried were taken out with 2 mighty shovels, and plunged into another cauldron of prepared honey that stood close by. Of cooks and cookmaids there were over 50, all clean, brisk, and blithe. In the capricious belly of the ox there were a dozen soft little sucking pigs, which, sewn up there, served to give it tenderness and flavor. The spices of different kinds did not seem to have been brought by the pound, but by the quarter, and all lay open to view in a great chest. In short, all preparations made for the wedding were in rustic style, but abundant enough to feed an army. Sancho observed, contemplated all, and everything won his heart. The first to captivate and take his fancy were the pots, out of which he would have very gladly helped himself to a moderate pipkinful. Pipkinful? What is a pipkinful? Pipkinful. Full. How the fuck? Pipkinful. Okay. Pipkinful definition. Not a pocketful. Okay, a pipkin is a small earthenware or pot, usually with a horizontal handle. Thank you. Anyway, I just got a lot of other words about tubas, and I was like, that's not what I'm looking for. Anyway, a pipkinful. Then the wineskin secured his affections, and lastly the produce of the frying pans, if indeed such imposing cauldrons may be called frying pans, and unable to control himself or bear it any longer, he approached one of the busy cooks, and civilly but hungrily begged permission to soak a scrap of bread in one of the pots, to which the cook made answer, Brother, this is not a day on which hunger is to have any sway, thanks to the rich Camacho. Get down and look about for a ladle, and skim off a hen or two, and much good may they do you. I don't see one, said Sancho. Oh, wait a bit, said the cook, sinner that I am. How particular and bashful you are. And so saying, he seized a bucket, and plunging it into one of the half jars, took up 3 hens and a couple of geese, and said to Sancho, Fall to, friend, and take the edge off your appetite with these skimmings until dinner time comes. I have nothing to put them in, said Sancho. Well then, said the cook, take spoon and all, for Camacho's wealth and happiness furnish everything. While Sancho fared thus, Don Quixote was watching the entrance at one end of the arcade of some 12 peasants, all in holiday and gala dresses, mounted on 12 beautiful mares with rich, handsome field trappings, and a number of little bells attached to their petrals, who, marshaled in regular order, ran not one but several courses over the meadow with jubilant shouts and cries of Long live Camacho and Quiteria! He as rich as she is fair, and she the fairest on earth. Hearing this, Don Quixote said to himself, It is easy to see these folks have never seen my Dulcinea del Toboso, for if they had, they would be more moderate in their praises of this Quiteria of theirs. Shortly after this, several bands of dancers of various sorts began to enter the arcade at different points, and among them one of the sword dancers, composed of some 24 lads, of gallant and high-spirited mien, clad in the finest and whitest of linen, with handkerchiefs embroidered in various colors with fine silk, and as one of those on the mares asked an active youth who led them if any of the dancers had been wounded. As yet, thank God, no one has been wounded, said he. We are all safe and sound, and he at once began to execute complicated figures with the rest of his comrades, and so many turns and so great dexterity that although Don Quixote was well used to see dances of the same kind, he thought he had never seen any so good as this. He also admired that came and composed of fair young maidens, none of whom seemed to be under 14 or over 18 years of age, all clad in green stuff, with their locks partly braided, partly flowing loose, but all of such bright gold as to vie with the sunbeams, and over them they wore garlands of jessamine, roses, amaranth, and honeysuckle. At their head was a venerable old man and an ancient dame, more brisk and active, however, than might have been expected from their years. The notes of a Zamora bagpipe accompanied them, and with modesty in their countenances and in their eyes, and lightness in their feet, they looked the best dancers in the world. Following these, there came an artistic dance of the sort they call speaking dances. It was comprised of 8 nymphs in 2 files, with the god Cupid leading one and interest the other, the former furnished with wings, bow, quiver, and arrows, the latter in a rich dress of gold and silk of divers colors. The nymphs that followed love bore their names written on white parchment in large letters on their backs. Poetry was the name of the first, wit of the second, birth of the third, and valor of the fourth. Those that followed interest were distinguished in the same way. The badge of the first announced liberality, that of the second largus, the third treasure, and the fourth peaceful possession. Hold on, what is largus? Largus. Generosity in bestowing money or gifts upon others. I see. Anyway. In front of them all came a wooden castle drawn by 4 men, all clad in ivy and hemp-stained green, and looking so natural that they nearly terrified Sancho. On the front of the castle, and on each of the 4 sides of its frame, it bore the inscription Castle of Caution. 4 skillful tabor and flute players accompanied them, and the dance having been opened, Cupid, after executing 2 figures, raised his eyes and bent his brow against a damsel who stood between the turrets of the castle, and thus addressed her. I am the mighty god whose sway is potent over land and sea. The heavens above us own me, nay, the shades below acknowledge me. I know no fear, I have my will, whate'er my whim or fancy be. For me there's no impossible, I order, bind, forbid, set free. Having concluded the stanza, he discharged an arrow at the top of the castle, and went back to his place. Interest then came forward, and went through 2 more figures, and as soon as the tabors ceased, he said, But mightier than love am I, the love it be that leads me on. Than mine no lineage is more high or older underneath the sun. To use me rightly few know how, to act without me fewer still, for I am interest, and I vow for evermore to do thy will. Interest retired, and Poetry came forward, and when she had gone through her figures, like the others, fixing her eyes on the damsel of the castle, she said, With many a fanciful conceit, fair lady, winsome posy, her soul an offering at thy feet, presents and sonnets unto thee. If thou my homage wilt not scorn, thy fortune watched by envious eyes, on wings of posy upborne, shall be exalted to the skies. Poetry withdrew, and on the side of interest liberality advanced, and after having gone through her figures, said, To give while shunning each extreme, the sparing hand, the overfree, therein consists, so wise men deem, the virtue liberality. But thee, fair lady, to enrich, myself a prodigal I'll prove, a vice not wholly shameful, which may find its fair excuse in love. In the same manner of all the verses of the 2 bands advanced and retired, and each executed its figures, and delivered its verses, some of them graceful, some burlesque, but Don Quixote's memory, though he had an excellent one, only carried away those that had just been quoted. All then mingled together, forming chains and breaking off again with graceful, unconstrained gaiety, and whenever love passed in front of the castle, he shot arrows up at it, while interest broke gilded pellets against it. At length, after they had danced a good while, interest drew out a great purse, made of the skin of a large brindled cat, and to all appearance full of money, and flung it at the castle, and with the force of the blow the boards fell asunder and tumbled down, leaving the damsel exposed and unprotected. Interest and the characters of his band advanced, throwing a great chain of gold over her neck, pretended to take her and lead her away captive, on seeing which Love and his supporters made as though they would release her, and the whole action being to the accompaniment of the tabors, and in the form of a regular dance. The wild men made peace between them, and with great dexterity readjusted and fixed the boards of the castle, and the damsel once more ensconced herself within, and with this dance wound up to the great enjoyment of the beholders. Don Quixote asked one of the nymphs who it was said that had composed and arranged it. She replied that it was a beneficiary of the town who had nice taste in devising things of the sort. I will lay a wager, said Don Quixote, that the same bachelor or beneficiary is a greater friend of Camacho's than Basilio's, and that he is better at satire than at vespers. He has introduced the accomplishments of Basilio and the riches of Camacho very neatly into the dance. Sancho Panza, who was listening to all this, exclaimed, The king is my cock, I stick to Camacho. It is easy to see thou art a clown, Sancho, said Don Quixote, and one of the sort that cried long life to the conqueror. I don't know what sort I am, returned Sancho, but I know very well I'll never get such elegant skimmings off Basilio's pots as long as I have got off Camacho's. And he showed him the bucketful of geese and hens, and seizing one, began to eat with great gaiety and appetite, saying, "A fig for the accomplishments of Basilio! As much as thou hast, so much art thou worth, and as much as thou art worth, so much hast thou. As a grandmother of mine used to say, there are only two families in the world, the haves and the haven'ts." And she stuck to the halves, and to this day, Signor Don Quixote, people would sooner feel the pulse of have than of no. An ass covered with gold looks better than a horse with a pack saddle. So once more I say I stick to Camacho, the bountiful skimmings of whose pots are geese and hens, hares and rabbits. But of Basilio's, if any ever come to hand, or even to foot, they'll be only rinsings. "Hast thou finished thou harangue, Sancho?" said Don Quixote. "Of course I have finished it," replied Sancho, "because I see your worship takes offense at it. But if it was not for that, there was work enough cut out for 3 days." "God grant that I may see thee dumb before I die, Sancho," said Don Quixote. "At that rate we are going. I'll be chewing clay before your worship dies, and then maybe I'll be so dumb I will not say a word until the end of the world, or at least till the day of judgment." "Even should that happen, O Sancho," said Don Quixote, "thy silence will never come up to all thou hast talked, art talking, and will talk all thy life. Moreover, it naturally stands to reason that my death will come before thine, so I never expect to see thee dumb, not even when thou art drinking or sleeping, and that is the utmost I can say." "In good faith, Signor," replied Sancho, "there is no trusting that fleshless one, I mean death, who devours the lamb as soon as the sheep, and, as I have heard our curate say, treads the equal foot upon the lofty tower of kings and the lowly huts of the poor. That lady is more mighty than dainty. She is in no way squeamish. She devours all, and is ready for all, and fills her alforjas with people of all sorts, ages, and ranks. She is no reaper that sleeps out the noontide. At all times she is reaping and cutting down, as well as the dry grass as the green. She never seems to chew, but bolts and swallows all that is before her, for she has a canine appetite that is never satisfied, and though she has no belly, she shows she has a dropsy, and is athirst to drink the lives of all that live, as one would drink a jug of cold water." "Oh, say no more, Sancho," said Don Quixote at this. "Don't try to be better and risk a fall, for in truth what thou hast said about death in thy rustic phrase is what a good preacher might have said. I tell thee, Sancho, if thou hadst discretion equal to thy mother wit, thou mightst take a pulpit in hand and go about the world preaching fine sermons. For he who preaches well lives well. He preaches well who lives well," said Sancho, "and I know no more theology than that." "Nor needest thou," said Don Quixote, "but I cannot conceive or make out how it is that the fear of God being the beginning of wisdom, thou, who art more afraid of a lizard than of him, knowest so much." "Pass judgment on your chivalry, Signor," returned Sancho, "and don't set yourself up to judge of other men's fears or braveries, for I am as good a fearer of God as my neighbors. But leave me to dispatch these skimmings, for all the rest is only idle talk that we shall be called to account for in the other world." And so saying, he began a fresh attack on the bucket. Oh, hold on. With such a hearty appetite that he aroused Don Quixote's, who no doubt would have helped him had he not been prevented by what must be told farther on. Well, then I think it's time for another bit of another little handful of fruit and see what's oh. Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Alright, anyway. Chapter 21, in which Camacho's wedding is continued with other delightful incidents. Hold on, I got a little. While Don Quixote and Sancho were engaged in the discussion set forth the last chapter, they heard loud shouts and a great noise which were uttered and made by the men on the mares as they went at full gallop, shouting to receive the bride and bridegroom, who were approaching with musical instruments and pageantry of all sorts around them, and accompanied by the priest and the relatives of both, and all the most distinguished people of the surrounding villages. When Sancho saw the bride, he exclaimed, "By my faith, she is not dressed like a country girl, but like some fine court lady. Egad, as well as I can make them out. The patena she wears, rich coral, and her green quencha stuff is 30-pile velvet. And then the white linen trimming, by my oath, but it's satin! Look at her rings, jet rings on them. May I never have the luck if they're not gold rings, and real gold, and set with pearls as white as a curdled milk, and every one of them worthy of an eye of one's head. Horse and baggage, what hair she has! If it is not a wig, I never saw longer or fairer all the days of my life. See how bravely she bears herself, and her shape! Wouldn't you say she was like a walking palm tree loaded with a cluster of dates? Where the trinkets she has hanging from her hair and neck look just like them. I swear in my heart she is a brave lass, and fit to pass over the banks of Flanders." Don Quixote laughed at Sancho's boorish eulogies, and thought that, saving his Dulcinea del Toboso, he had never seen a more beautiful woman. The fair Quiteria appeared somewhat pale, which was, no doubt, because of the bad night brides always past dressing themselves out for their wedding on the morrow. They advanced towards a theatre that stood on one side of the meadow, decked with carpets and boughs, where they were to plight their troth, and from which they were to beholden the dances and plays. But at the moment of their arrival at the spot, they heard a loud outcry behind them, and a voice exclaiming, "Wait a little, ye, as inconsiderate as ye are hasty." At these words all turned around and perceived that the speaker was a man clad in what seemed to be a loose black coat, garnished with crimson patches like flames. He was crowned, as was presently seen, with a crown of gloomy cypress, and in his hand he held a long staff. As he approached, he was recognized by everyone as the gay Basilio, and all waited anxiously to see what would come of his words, in dread of some catastrophe in consequence of his appearance at such a moment. He came up at last, weary and breathless, and planting himself in front of the bridal pair, drove his staff, which had a steel spike at the end, into the ground, and with a pale face and eyes fixed on Quiteria, he thus addressed her in a hoarse, trembling voice. "Dost thou know, ungrateful Quiteria, that according to the holy law we acknowledge, so long as thou canst take no husband, nor art thou ignorant either, that, in my hopes that time and my own exertions would improve my fortunes, I have never failed to observe the respect due to thy honor. But thou, casting behind thee all thou owest to my true love, wouldst surrender what is mine to another whose wealth serves to bring him not only good fortune, but supreme happiness, and now to complete it. Not that I think he deserves it, but inasmuch as heaven is pleased to bestow it upon him, I will, with my own hands, do away with the obstacle that may interfere with it, and remove myself from between you. Long live rich Camacho. Many a happy year may his life... many a happy year may he live with the ungrateful Quiteria, and let the poor Basilio die. Basilio, whose poverty clipped the wings of his happiness, and brought him to the grave." And so saying, he seized the staff he had driven into the ground, leaving one half of it fixed there, showed it to be a sheath that concealed the terribly long rapier, and what may be called its hilt being planted in the ground, he swiftly and coolly and deliberately threw himself upon it, and in an instant the bloody point and half the steel blade appeared at his back, the unhappy man falling to the earth, bathed in his blood, and transfixed by his own weapon. My God. His friends at once ran to his aid, filled with grief at his misery and sad fate, and Don Quixote, dismounting from Rocinante, hastened to support him, and took him in his arms, and found he had not yet ceased to breathe. They were about to draw out the rapier, but the priest who was standing by objected to its being withdrawn before he had confessed him. At the instant of its withdrawal would be that of his death. Basilio, however, reviving slightly, said in a weak voice, as though in pain, "If thou wouldst consent, cruel Quiteria, to give me thy hand as my bride in this last fatal moment, I might still hope that my rashness would find pardon, as by its means I attained the bliss of being thine." Hearing this, the priest bade him thank for the welfare of his soul, rather than of the cravings of the body, and in all earnestness implore God's pardon for his sins and for his rash resolve to which Basilio replied that he was determined not to confess unless Quiteria first gave him her hand in marriage, for that happiness would compose his mind and give him courage to make his confession. Don Quixote, hearing the wounded man's entreaty, exclaimed aloud that what Basilio asked was just and reasonable, and moreover a request that might be easily complied with, and that it would be as much to Signor Camacho's honor to receive the Lady Quiteria as the widow of the brave Basilio, as if he had received her direct from her father. "In this case," said he, "it will be only to say yes, and no consequences can follow the utterance of the word, for the nuptial couch of this marriage must be the grave." Camacho was listening to all this, perplexed and bewildered, and not knowing what to say or do. But so urgent were the entreaties of Basilio's friends, imploring him to allow Quiteria to give him her hand, so that his soul, quitting this life in despair, should not be lost, that they moved, nay, forced him to say that if Quiteria were willing to give it, he was satisfied, as it was only putting off the fulfillment of his wishes for a moment. At once they assailed Quiteria and pressed her, some with prayers, and others with tears, and others with persuasive arguments, to give her hand to poor Basilio, but she, harder than marble and more unmoved than any statue, seemed unable or unwilling to utter a word. Nor would she have given any reply had not the priest bade her decide quickly what she was meant to do, as Basilio now had his soul at his teeth, and there was no time for hesitation. On this the fair Quiteria, to all appearance distressed, grieved, and repentant, advanced without a word to where Basilio lay, his eyes already turned in his head, his breathing short and painful, murmuring the name Quiteria between his teeth, apparently about to die like a heathen and not like a Christian. Quiteria approached and, kneeling, demanded his hand by signs without speaking. Basilio opened his eyes and, gazing fixedly at her, said, "Oh, Quiteria, why hast thou turned compassionate at the moment when thy compassion will serve as a dagger to rob me of life? For I have not now the strength left either to bear the happiness thou givest me in accepting me as thine, or to suppress the pain that is rapidly drawing the dread shadow of death over my eyes. What I entreat of thee, O thou fatal star to me, is that the hand thou demandest of me and wouldst givest me be not given out of complacence. I don't know. Or to deceive me afresh, but that thou confess and declare that without any constraint upon thy will thou givest it to me as to thy lawful husband. For it is not meet that thou shouldst trifle with me at such a moment as this, or have recourse to falsehoods with one who has dealt so truly by thee." While uttering these words, he showed such weakness that the bystanders expected each return of faintness would take his life with it. Then Quiteria, overcome with modesty and shame, holding in her right hand the hand of Basilio, said, "No force would bend my will as freely, therefore, as it is possible for me to do so. I will give thee the hand of a lawful wife, and take thine if thou givest it to me of thine own free will, untroubled and unaffected by the calamity this hasty act has brought upon thee." "Yes, I give it," said Basilio, "not agitated or distracted, but with unclouded reason that heaven is pleased to grant me. Thus I do give myself thee, thy husband." "And I give myself to be thy wife," said Quiteria, "whether thou livest many years, or they carry thee from my arms to the grave." "For one so badly wounded," observed Sancho at this point, "this young man has a great deal to say. I should make him leave off billing and cooling and attend to his soul, for, to my thinking, he has it more on his tongue than at his teeth." Basilio and Quiteria having thus joined hands, the priest, deeply moved, and with tears in his eyes, pronounced the blessing upon them, and implored heaven to grant an easy passage to the soul of the newly wedded man, who, at the instant he received the blessing, started nimbly to his feet, and with unparalleled effrontery pulled out the rapier that had been sheathed in his body. All the bystanders were astounded. No, and some, more simple than inquiring, began shouting, "A miracle! A miracle!" But Basilio replied, "No miracle! No miracle! Only a trick! A trick!" The priest, perplexed and amazed, made haste to examine the wound with both hands, and found the blade had passed not through Basilio's flesh and ribs, but through a hollow iron tube full of blood, which he had adroitly fixed at the place. The blood, as was afterwards ascertained, had been so prepared as not to congeal. In short, the priest and Camacho and most of those present saw they were tricked and made fools of. The bride showed no signs of displeasure at the deception, and, on the contrary, hearing them say that the marriage, being fraudulent, would not be valid, she said that she confirmed it afresh. Whence they all concluded that the affair had been planned by agreement and understanding between the pair, whereat Camacho and his supporters were so mortified that they proceeded to revenge themselves by violence, and a great number of them, drawing their swords, attacked Basilio, in whose protection as many more swords were in an instant unsheathed, while Don Quixote, taking the lead on horseback, with his lance over his arm and well covered with his shield, made all give way before him. Sancho, who never found any pleasure or enjoyment in such doings, retreated to the wine jars from which he had taken his delectable skimmings, considering that, as a holy place, that spot would be respected. "Hold, sirs, hold!" cried Don Quixote in a loud voice. "We have no right to take vengeance for wrongs that love may do to us. Remember, love and war are the same thing, and as in war it is allowable and common to make use of wiles and stratagems to overcome the enemy, so in the contests and rivalries of love the tricks and devices employed to attain the desired end are justifiable, provided they be not to discredit or dishonor of the loved object. Quiteria belonged to Basilio, and Basilio to Quiteria by the just and beneficent disposal of heaven. Camacho is rich and can purchase his pleasure when, where, and as it pleases him. Basilio has but this ewe lamb, and no one, however powerful he may be, shall take her from him. These two whom God hath joined, man cannot separate, and he who attempts to must first pass the point of this lance." And so saying, he brandished it so stoutly and dexterously that he overawed all who did not know him. But so deep an impression had the rejection of Quiteria made on Camacho's mind that it banished her at once from his thoughts, and so the counsels of the priest, who was a wise and kindly disposed man, prevailed with him, and by their means he and his partisans were pacified and tranquilized, and to prove it, put up their swords again, in vying against the pliancy of Quiteria rather than the craftiness of Basilio. Camacho maintaining that if Quiteria as a maiden had such love for Basilio, she would have loved him too as a married woman, and that he ought to thank heaven more for having taken her than for having given her. Camacho and those of his following, therefore, being consoled and pacified, those on Basilio's side were appeased, and the rich Camacho, to show that he felt no resentment for the trick and did not care about it, desired the festival to go on just as if he were married in reality. Neither Basilio, however, nor his bride, nor their followers would take any part in it, and they withdrew to Basilio's village, for the poor, if they are persons of virtue and good sense, have those who follow, honor, and uphold them, just as the rich have those who flatter and dance attendance on them. With them they carried Don Quixote, regarding him as a man of worth and a stout one. Sancho alone had a cloud on his soul, for he found himself debarred from waiting for Camacho's splendid feast and festival, which lasted until night, and thus dragged away, he moodily followed his master, who accompanied Basilio's party, and left behind him the flesh pots of Egypt. though in his heart he took them with him. And their now nearly finished skimmings that he carried in the bucket conjured up visions before his eyes of the glory and abundance of the good cheer he was losing. And so vexed and dejected, though not hungry, without dismounting from Dapple, he followed in the footsteps of Rocinante. Oh, what a twist! I always love a good, oh, a trick! Ah, what joy. Alright, let's see here. Chapter 22, wherein is related the grand adventure of the caves of Montesinos in the heart of La Mancha, which the valiant Don Quixote brought to a happy termination. Many and great were the attention shown to Don Quixote by the newly married couple, who felt themselves under an obligation to him for coming forward in defense of their cause, and they exalted his wisdom to the same level with his courage, rating him as a Cid in arms and a Cicero in eloquence. Worthy Sancho enjoyed himself for 3 days at the expense of the pair, for whom they learned that the sham wound was not a scheme arranged with the fair Quiteria, but a device of Basilio's, who counted on exactly the result they had seen. He confessed, it is true, that he had confided his idea to some of his friends, so that at the proper time they might aid him in his purpose and ensure the success of the deception. That, said Don Quixote, is not and ought not to be called deception, which aims at virtuous ends, and the marriage of lovers he maintained to be a most excellent end, reminding them, however, that love has no greater enemy than hunger and constant want. For love is all gaiety, enjoyment, and happiness, especially when the lover is in the possession of the object of his love, and poverty and want are the declared enemies of all these, which he said to urge Signor Basilio to abandon the practice of those accomplishments he was skilled in, for, though they brought him fame, they brought him no money, and apply himself to the acquisition of wealth by legitimate industry, which will never fail those who are prudent and persevering. The poor man, who is a man of honor, if indeed a poor man can be a man of honor, has a jewel when he has a fair wife, and if she is taken from him, his honor is taken from him and slain. The fair woman, who is a woman of honor, and whose husband is poor, deserves to be crowned with the laurels and crowns of victory and triumph. Beauty by itself attracts the desires of all who behold it, and the royal eagles and birds of towering flight stoop on it as on a dainty lure. But if beauty be accompanied by want and penury, then the ravens and the kites and the other birds of prey assail it, and she who stands firm against such attacks well deserves to be called the crown of her husband. Remember, O prudent Basilio, added Don Quixote, it was the opinion of a certain sage, I know not whom, that there was not more than one good woman in the whole world, and his advice was that each one should think and believe that this one good woman was his own wife, and in this way he would live happy. I myself am not married, nor, so far, has it ever entered my thoughts to be so. Nevertheless, I would venture to give advice to anyone who might ask it, as to the mode in which he should seek a wife, such as he would be content to marry. The first thing I would recommend him would be to look to good name rather than to wealth, for a good woman does not win a good name merely by being good, but by letting it be seen that she is so, and open looseness and freedom do more damage to a woman's honor than secret depravity. If you take a good woman into your house, it will be an easy matter to keep her good, and even to make her still better. But if you take a bad one, you will find it hard work to mend her, for it is no very easy matter to pass from one extreme to the other. I do not say it is impossible, but I look upon it as difficult. Sancho, listening to all this, said to himself, this master of mine, when I say anything that has weight and substance, it says I might take a pulpit in hand and go about the world preaching fine sermons, but I say of him, when he begins striking maxims together and giving advice, not only he might take a pulpit in hand, but 2 on each finger, and go into the marketplaces to his heart's content. Devil take you for a knight-errant, what a lot of things you know. I used to think in my heart that the only thing he knew was what belonged to his chivalry, but there is nothing he won't have a finger in. Sancho muttered this, and somewhat aloud, and his master overheard him, and asked, What art thou muttering there, Sancho? I am not saying anything or muttering anything, said Sancho. I was only saying to myself that I wish I had heard your worship had said just now before I married. Perhaps I'd say now that oxes that loose licks himself well. The ox that's loose licks himself well. Is thy Teresa so bad, then, Sancho? She is not very bad, replied Sancho, but she is not very good. At least she is not as good as I could wish. Thou dost wrong, Sancho, said Don Quixote, to speak ill of thy wife, for, after all, she is the mother of thy children. We are quits, returned Sancho, for she ill speaks of me whenever she takes it into her head, especially when she is jealous, and Satan himself could not put up with her then. In fine, they remained 3 days with the newly married couple, by whom they were entertained and treated like kings. Don Quixote begged the fencing licentiate to find him a guide to show him the way to the cave of Mosteninos, as he had a great desire to enter it and see with his own eyes if the wonderful tales that were told of it all over the country were true. The licentiate said he would give him a cousin of his own, a famous scholar and one very much given to reading books of chivalry, and would have great pleasure in conducting him to the mouth of the very cave, and would show him the lakes of Ruidera, which were likewise famous all over La Mancha, and even all over Spain. And he assured him he would find him entertaining, for he was a youth who could write books good enough to be printed and dedicated to princes. The cousin arrived at last, leading an ass in full, with a pack saddle covered with a party-colored carpet or sackcloth. Sancho saddled Rocinante, got Dabble ready, and stalked his alforjas, along with which went those of the cousin, likewise well filled, and so, commending themselves to God and bidding farewell to all, they set out, taking the road for the famous cave of Mosteninos. Or Montesinos, I think that's going to be how it is. Montesinos. Now, what was I looking at? A party-colored. Having or consisting of 2 or more colors. Okay. Simple enough. I could probably use another sip of water. Hold on. I suppose all the extra sugar in those cranberries is not doing me any favors. Drying my throat. Alright. Actually, you know what? A little more. Delicious. On the way, Don Quixote asked the cousin of what sort and character his pursuits, avocations, and studies were, to which he replied that he was by profession a humanist, and that his pursuits and studies were making books for the press, all of great utility and no less entertainment to the nation. One was called the Book of Liveries, in which he described 703 liveries, with their colors, mottos, and ciphers, from which gentlemen of the court might pick and choose any they fancied for their festivals and revels, without having to go a-begging for them from anyone, or puzzling their brains, as the saying is, to have them appropriate to their objects and purpose. For, said he, I gave the jealous, the rejected, the forgotten, the absent, and what will suit them, and fit them without fail. I have another book, too, which I shall call Metamorphosis, or the Spanish Ovid, one of rare and original invention. For, imitating Ovid in burlesque style, I show in it who the Giralda of Seville and the Angel of Magdalena were, what the sewer of Vicinguera at Cordova was, what the bulls of Guisando, the Sierra Morena, the Leganitos, and Lavapiés fountains at Madrid, not forgetting those of Piojo, of the Cano Dorado, and of the Priora, and all with their allegories, metaphors, and changes, so that they are amusing, interesting, and instructive, all at once. Another book I have, which I call the Supplement to Polydore Virgil, which treats of the invention of things, and is a work of great erudition and research, for I establish and elucidate elegantly some things of great importance which Polydore omitted to mention. He forgot to tell us who was the first man in the world that had a cold in his head, and who was the first to try salivation for the French disease. Sorry, what? But I give it accurately set forth, and quote more than 5 and 20 authors in proof of it. So you may perceive I have labored to good purpose, and that the books will be of service to the whole world. Sancho, who had been very attentive to the cousin's words, said to him, Tell me, Signor, and God give you luck in printing your books, can you tell me, for of course you know, as you know everything, who was the first man that scratched his head? For to my thinking it must have been our father Adam. So it must, replied the cousin, for there is no doubt but Adam had a head and hair, and being the first man in the world, he would have scratched himself sometimes. So I think, said Sancho, but now tell me, who was the first tumbler in the world? Oh, really, brother, answered the cousin, I could not at this moment say positively without having investigated it. I will look it up when I go back to where I have my books, and will satisfy you the next time we meet, for this will not be the last time. Oh, look here, Signor, said Sancho, don't give yourself any trouble for it, for I have just at this minute, hit upon what I asked you. The first tumbler in the world, you must know, was Lucifer, when they cast or pitched him out of heaven, for he came tumbling into the bottomless pit. Why, you're right, friend, said the cousin, and said Don Quixote, Sancho, that question and answer are not thine own, thou hast heard them from someone else. Oh, hold your peace, Signor, said Sancho. Faith, if I take to asking questions and answering, I'll go on from this till tomorrow morning. Nay, to ask foolish things and answer nonsense, I needn't go looking for help from my neighbors. Thou hast said more than thou art aware of, Sancho, said Don Quixote, for there are some who weary themselves out in learning and proving things that after they are known and proved are not worth a farthing to the understanding of memory. In this and other pleasant conversation the day went by, and that night they might put up at a small hamlet whence it was not more than 2 leagues to the cave of Montesinos. So the cousin told Don Quixote, adding that if he was bent upon entering it, it would be requisite of him to provide himself with ropes so that he might be tied and lowered into its depths. Don Quixote said that even if it reached to the bottomless pit, he meant to see where it went to. So they bought about 100 fathoms of rope, and next... And next day, at 2 in the afternoon, they arrived at the cave, the mouth of which is spacious and wide, but full of thorn and wild fig bushes and brambles and briars, so thick and matted that they completely close it up from cover to cover. On coming within sight of it, the cousin, Sancho, and Don Quixote dismounted, and the first two immediately tied the latter very firmly with the ropes. As they were girding and swathing him, Sancho said to him, Mind what you are about, master mine. Don't go burying yourself alive, or putting yourself where you'll be like a bottle put to cool in a well. It is no affair or business of your worships to become the explorer of this, which must be worse than a Moorish dungeon. Oh, tie me and hold thy peace, said Don Quixote, for an emprise like this, friend Sancho, was reserved for me. And, said the guide, I beg you, Señor Don Quixote, to observe carefully and examine with 100 eyes everything that is within there. Perhaps there may be some things for me to put into my book of transformations. The drum is in hands that will know how to beat it well enough, said Sancho Panza. When he said this and finished the tying, which was not over the armor, but only over the doublet, Don Quixote observed, it was careless of us not to have provided ourselves with a small cattle bell to be tied on the rope close to me, the sound of which will show that I was still descending and alive, but as that is now out of the question, in God's hands be it to guide me. And forthwith he fell on his knees, and in a low voice offered up a prayer to heaven, imploring God to aid him and grant him success in this, to all appearance, perilous and untried adventure, and then exclaimed, O mistress of my actions and movements, illustrious and peerless Dulcinea del Toboso, If so be the prayers and supplications of this fortunate lover can reach thy ears, by thy incomparable beauty, I entreat thee to listen to them, for they but ask thee not to refuse me thy favor and protection now that I stand in such need of them. I am about to precipitate, to sink, to plunge myself into the abyss that is here before me, only to let the world know that while thou dost favor me, there is no impossibility I will not attempt and accomplish. With these words he approached the cavern, and perceived that it was impossible to let himself down or effect an entrance except by sheer force or cleaving a passage. So, drawing his sword, he began to demolish and cut away the brambles at the mouth of the cave, at the noise of which a vast multitude of crows and chops flew out of it so thick and so fast that they knocked Don Quixote over. And if he had been much of a believer in augury, as he was a Catholic Christian, he would have taken it as a bad omen and declined to bury himself in such a place. He got up, however, and as there came no more crows or night birds like the bats that flew out at the same time with the crows, the cousin and Sancho giving him rope, he lowered himself into the depths of the dread cavern. And as he entered it, Sancho sent his blessing after him, making 1,000 crosses over him, and saying, God and the Penna de Francia, and the Trinity of Gaeta, guide thee. Flower and cream of knights errant. There thou goest, thou daredevil of the earth, heart of steel, arm of brass, once more God guide thee, and send thee back safe, sound, and unhurt to the light of this world thou art leaving, to bury thyself in the darkness thou art seeking there. And the cousin offered up almost the same prayers and supplications. What? Oh. Hi. Don Quixote kept calling to them to give him rope and more rope, and they gave it out little by little, and by the time the calls which came out of the cave as out of a pipe ceased to be heard, they let down 100 fathoms of rope, and were inclined to pull Don Quixote up again, as they could give him no more rope. However, they waited about half an hour, at the end of which they began to gather in the rope again with great ease, and without feeling any weight, which made them fancy Don Quixote was remaining below. And persuaded that it was so, Sancho wept bitterly, and hauled away in great haste in order to settle the question. When, however, they had come to, as it seemed, rather more than 80 fathoms, they felt a weight, at which they were greatly delighted. And at last, at 10 fathoms more, they saw Don Quixote distinctly, and Sancho called out to him, saying, Welcome back, Señor, for we had begun to think you were going to stop there to found a family. But Don Quixote answered not a word, and drawing him out entirely, perceived he had his eyes shut, and every appearance of being fast asleep. They stretched him on the ground and untied him, but still he did not wake. However, they rolled him back and forwards, and shook and pulled him about, so that after some time he came to himself, stretching himself just as if he were waking up from a deep and sound sleep, and looking about him said, Oh, God forgive you, friends! Ye have taken me away from the sweetest and most delightful existence and spectacle that ever human being enjoyed or beheld. Now indeed do I know that all the pleasures of this life pass away like a shadow in a dream, or fade like the flower of the field. O ill-fated Montesinos! O sore-wounded Durandarte! O unhappy Bellarma! O tearful Guadiana! And ye, O hapless daughters of Ruidera, who show in your waves the tears that flowed from your beauteous eyes. The cousin and Sancho Panza listened with deep attention to the words of Don Quixote, who uttered them as though with immense pain he drew them up from his very bowels. They begged of him to explain himself, and tell them what he had seen in that hell down there. Hell, you call it? Hell, do you call it? Said Don Quixote. Oh, call it by no such name, for it does not deserve it, as ye shall soon see. He then begged them to give him something to eat, as he was very hungry. They spread the cousin's sackcloth on the grass, and put the stores of the Alforjas into requisition. And all three, sitting down lovingly and sociably, they made a luncheon and a supper of it, all in one, and when the sackcloth was removed, Don Quixote of La Mancha said, Let no one rise, and attend to me, my sons, both of you. Chapter 23. Of the wonderful things the incomparable Don Quixote said he saw in the profound cave of Mostenios. The impossibility and magnitude of which caused this adventure to be deemed apocryphal. 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 Okay, that works. It was about 4 in the afternoon when the sun, veiled in clouds, with subdued light and tempered beams, enabled Don Quixote to relate, without heat or inconvenience, what he had seen in the cave of Mostenios to his 2 illustrious hearers, and he began as follows. A matter of some 12 or 14 times a man's height down in this pit. On the right-hand side there is a recess of space, roomy enough to contain a large cart with its mules. A little light reaches it through some chinks or crevasses, communicating with it and open to the surface of the earth. This recess or space I perceived when I was already growing weary and disgusted at finding myself hanging suspended by the rope, traveling downwards into that dark region without any certainty or knowledge of where I was going, so I resolved to enter it and rest myself for a while. I called out, telling you not to let out more rope until I bade you. But you cannot have heard me. I then gathered in the rope you were sending me, and making a coil or pile of it, I seated myself upon it, ruminating and considering what I was to do to lower myself to the bottom, having no one to hold me up. And as I was thus deep in thought and perplexity, suddenly and without provocation, a profound sleep fell upon me, and when I least expected it, I know not how, I awoke and found myself in the midst of the most beautiful and delightful meadow that nature could produce, or the most lively human imagination conceive. I opened my eyes, I rubbed them, and found I was not asleep, but thoroughly awake. Nevertheless, I felt my head and breast to satisfy myself whether it was I myself who was there, or some empty, delusive phantom. But touch, feeling, the collected thoughts that passed through my mind, all convinced me that I was the same, and there that I am this moment. Next, there presented itself to my sight a stately royal palace or castle, with walls that seemed built of clear, transparent crystal, and though 2 great doors that opened wide therein, I saw coming forth and advancing towards me a venerable old man, clad in a long gown of mulberry-colored serge that trailed upon the ground. On his shoulders and breast he had a green satin collegiate hood, and covering his head a black Milanese bonnet, and his snow-white beard fell below his girdle. He carried no arms whatever, nothing but a rosary of beads bigger than fair-sized filiberts, each 10th bead being like a moderate ostrich egg. His bearing, his gait, his dignity and imposing presence had me spellbound and wondering. He approached me, and the first thing he did was to embrace me closely, and then he said to me, "For a long time now, O valiant Don Quixote of La Mancha, we who are here enchanted in these solitudes have been hoping to see thee, that thou mayest make known to the world what is shut up and concealed in this deep cave, called the cave of Montesinos, which thou hast entered, an achievement reserved for thy invincible heart and stupendous courage alone to attempt. Come with me, illustrious sir, and I will show thee the marvels hidden within this transparent castle, whereof I am the alcaide and perpetual warden, for I am Montesinos himself, from whom the cave takes its name." The instant he told me he was Montesinos, I asked him if the story they told in the world above here was true, that he had taken out the heart of his great friend Durandarte from his breast with a little dagger, and carried it to the lady Bellarma, as his friend, when at the point of death, had commanded him. He said in reply that they spoke the truth in every respect as to the dagger, for it was not a dagger, nor little, but it was a burnished poniard sharper than an awl. Poniard. Poniard? The poniard. Oh, poniard. Poniard? A small, slim dagger. I see. Sharper than an awl. I mean, I'm not... Anyway. The poniard must have been made by By Raymond de Joses the Sevillan, said Sancho. I do not know, said Don Quixote. It could not have been by that poniard maker, however, because Raymond de Joses was a man of yesterday, and the affair of Roncesvalles, where this mishap occurred, was long ago. But the question is of no great importance, nor does it affect or make any alteration in the truth or substance of the story. Oh, that is true, said the cousin. Continue, Señor Don Quixote, for I am listening to you with the greatest pleasure in the world. And with no less do I tell the tale, said Don Quixote. And so, to proceed, the venerable Montesinos led me into the palace of crystal, where in a lower chamber, strangely cool and entirely of alabaster, was an elaborately wrought marble tomb, upon which I beheld stretched at full length a knight, not of bronze or marble or jasper, as are seen on other tombs, but of actual flesh and bone. His right hand, which seemed to me somewhat hairy and sinewy, a sign of great strength in its owner, lay on the side of his heart. But before I could put any question to Montesinos, he, seeing me gazing at the tomb in amazement, said to me, This is my friend Durandarte, flower and mirror of the true lovers and valiant knights of his time. He is held enchanted here, as I myself and many others are, by that French enchanter Merlin, who, they say, was the devil's son, but my belief, not that he was the devil's son, but that he knew, as they say, as the saying is, a point more than the devil. How or why he enchanted us, no one knows, but time will tell, and I suspect the time is not far off. What I marvel at is that I know it to be as sure as that it is now day, that Durandarte ended his life in my arms, and that after his death I took out his heart with my own hands, and indeed it must have weighed more than 2 pounds, for according to naturalists, he who has a large heart is more largely endowed with valor than he who has a small one. Then, as this is the case, and as the knight did really die, how comes it that he now moans and sighs from time to time, as if he were still alive? As he said this, the wretched Durandarte cried out in a loud voice, O cousin Montesinos, 'twas my last request of thee, when my soul hath left the body, and that lying dead I be, with thy poniard or thy dagger, cut the heart out from out my breast, and bear it to Belerema. This was my last request. On hearing this, the venerable Montesinos fell on his knees before the unhappy knight, and with tearful eyes exclaimed, Long since, Signor Durandarte, my beloved cousin, long since have I done what you bade me on that sad day when I lost you. I took out your heart as well as I could, not leaving an atom of it in your breast. I wiped it with a lace handkerchief. I took the road to France with it, having first laid you in the bosom of the earth with tears enough to wash and cleanse my hands of the blood that covered them after wandering among your bowels, and more by token. O cousin of my soul, at the first village I came to after leaving Roncesvalles, I sprinkled a little salt upon your heart to keep it sweet, and bring it, if not fresh, at least pickled, into the presence of the Lady Belerma, whom, together with you, myself, Juan Diana your squire, and Dueno Ruidera, and her 7 daughters and 2 nieces, and many more of your friends and acquaintances, the sage Merlin has been keeping enchanted here these many years. And although more than 500 have gone by, not one of us has died. Ruidera and her daughters and nieces alone are missing, and these, because of the tears they shed, Merlin, out of the compassion he seems to have felt for them, changed into so many lakes, which to this day in the world of the living and in the province of La Mancha are called the Lakes of Ruidera. The 7 daughters belong to the kings of Spain, and the 2 nieces to the knights of a very holy order called the Order of St. John. Juan Diana your squire, likewise bewailing your fate, was changed into a river of his own name, but when he came to the surface and beheld the sun of another earth, so great was his grief at finding he was leaving you that he plunged into the bowels of the earth. However, as he cannot help following his natural course, he from time to time comes forth and shows himself to the sun and the world. the lakes aforesaid send him their waters, and with these and others that come to him, he makes a grand and imposing entrance into Portugal. But for all that, go where he may, he shows his melancholy and sadness, and takes no pride in breeding dainty choice fish, only coarse and tasteless sorts, very different from those of the golden Tagus. All this I tell you now, O cousin mine, I have told you many times before, and as you make no answer, I fear that either you believe me not, or do not hear me, whereat I feel God knows what grief. I have no news to give you, which, if it serves not to alleviate your sufferings, will not in any wise increase them. Know that you are here. Know that you have here before you. Open your eyes, and you will see that great knight of whom the sage Merlin has prophesied such great things. That Don Quixote of La Mancha, I mean, who has again, and to better purpose than in past times, revived in these days knight-errantry long since forgotten, and by whose intervention and aid it may be we shall be disenchanted, for great deeds are reserved for great men. And if that may not be, said the wretched Durandarte in a low and feeble voice, if that may not be, then, my cousin, I say patience and shuffle. And turning over on his side, he relapsed into his former silence without uttering another word. Okay. And now there was heard a great outcry and lamentation, accompanied by deep sighs and bitter sobs. I looked around, and through the crystal wall I saw passing through another chamber a procession of 2 lines of fair damsels, all clad in mourning, and with white turbans of Turkish fashion on their heads. Behind, in the rear of these, there came a lady, for so, from her dignity, she seemed to be so, also clad in black, with a white veil so long and ample that it swept the ground. Her turban was twice as large as the largest of any of the others. Her eyebrows met, her nose was rather flat, her mouth was large but with ruddy lips, and her teeth, of which at times she showed a glimpse, were seen to be sparse and ill-set, though as white as peeled almonds. She carried in her hands a fine cloth, and in it, as well as I could make out, a heart that had been mummied. So parched and dry was it. Montesinos told me that all those forming the procession were the attendants of Durandarte and Belerma, who were enchanted there with their master and mistress, and that the last, she who carried the heart in the cloth, was the Lady Belerma, who with her damsels 4 days in the week went in a procession singing, or rather weeping, dirges. I've lost my place. Over the body and miserable heart of his cousin. And that if she appeared to me somewhat ill-favored or not so beautiful as fame reported her, it was because of the bad nights and worse days that she passed in that enchantment, as I could see by the great dark circles round her eyes and her sickly complexion. Her sallowness and the many rings round her eyes, said he, are not caused by the periodical ailment usual with women, for it is many months and even years since she has had any, but by the grief her own heart suffers because of that which she holds in her hand perpetually, and which recalls and brings back to her memory the sad fate of her lost lover. Were it not for this, hardly would the great Dulcinea del Toboso, so celebrated in all these parts, and even in the world, come up to her for beauty, grace, and gaiety. Hold hard, said Aetus. Tell your story as you ought, Signor Don Montesinos, for you know very well that all comparisons are odious, and there is no occasion to compare one person with another. The peerless Dulcinea del Toboso is what she is, and the Lady Don Belerma is what she is, and has been, and that's enough. To which he made answer, "Oh, forgive me, Signor Don Quixote. I own I was wrong, and spoke unadvisedly in saying that the Lady Dulcinea could scarcely come up to the Lady Belerma. For if it were enough for me to have learned, by what means I know not, that you are her knight, to make me bite my tongue out before I compared her to anything save heaven itself." After this apology, which the great Montesinos made me, my heart recovered itself from the shock I had received in hearing my lady compared with Belerma. "Still, I wonder," said Sancho, that your worship did not get upon the old fellow and bruise every bone of his with kicks, and pluck his beard until you didn't leave a hair in it. Oh, nay, Sancho, my friend, said Don Quixote. It would not have been right in me to do so, for we are all bound to pay respect to the aged, even though they be not knights, but especially to those who are, and who are enchanted. I only know I gave him as good as he brought in the many other questions and answers we exchanged. I cannot understand, Señor Don Quixote, remarked the cousin here. How is it that your worship, in such a short space of time as you have been below there, could have seen so many things and said and answered so much? How long has it been since I went down? Asked Don Quixote. Little better than an hour, replied Sancho. Well, that cannot be, returned Don Quixote, because night overtook me while I was there, and day came, and it was night again, and day again 3 times, so that, by my reckoning, I have been 3 days in those remote regions beyond our ken. My master must be right, replied Sancho, for as everything that has happened to him is by enchantment, maybe what seems to us an hour would seem 3 days and nights there. Well, that's it, said Don Quixote. And did your worship eat anything all that time, Señor? Asked the cousin. I never touched a morsel, answered Don Quixote, nor did I feel hunger or think of it. And do the enchanted eat? Said Don Quixote. They neither eat, said Don Quixote, nor are they subject to the greater excrements, though it is thought that their nails, beards, and hair grow. And did the enchanted sleep, Señor? Asked Sancho. Certainly not, replied Don Quixote. At least during those 3 days I was with them, not one of them closed an eye, nor did I either. The proverb, tell me what company thou keepest, and I'll tell thee what thou art, is to the point here, said Sancho. Your worship keeps company with enchanted people that are always fasting and watching. And wonder is it, then, that you neither eat nor sleep while you are with them? But forgive me, Señor, if I say that all of this you have told us now, may God take me. I was just going to say the devil, if I believe a single particle. What? Said the cousin. Has Señor Don Quixote, then, been lying? Why, even if he wished it, he had not the time to imagine or put together such a host of lies. I don't believe my master lies. If not, then what dost thou believe? Asked Don Quixote. I believe, replied Sancho, that this Merlin, or those enchanters who enchanted the whole crew your worship says you saw and discoursed with down there, stuffed your imagination or your mind with all this rigmarole that you have been treating us to, and all that is still to come. All that may be, Sancho, replied Don Quixote, but it is not so, for everything that I have told you I saw with my own eyes, and touched with my own hands. But what will you say when I tell you now how, among the countless other marvelous things Montesinos showed me, of which at leisure and at the proper time I will give thee an account in the course of our company, for they would not be all in place here, he showed me 3 country girls who went skipping and capering like goats over the pleasant fields there, and the instant I beheld them I knew one to be the peerless Dulcinea del Toboso, and other 2 the same country girls that were with her and that we spoke to on the road from El Toboso. I asked Montesinos if he knew them, and he told me he did not, but he thought they must be some enchanted ladies of distinction, for it was only a few days before that they had made their appearance in those meadows. But I was not to be surprised at that, because there were a great many other ladies there of times past and present, enchanted in various strange shapes, and among them he had recognized Queen Guinevere and her dame Quintanona, she who poured out the wine for Lancelot when he came from Britain. When Sancho Panza heard his master say that he was ready to take leave of his senses or die with laughter, for as he knew the real truth about the pretended enchantment of Dulcinea, in which he himself had been the enchanter and concocter of all the evidence, he made up his mind at last, beyond all doubt, his master was out of his wits and stark mad, and so he said to him, "It was an evil hour, a worse season, and a sorrowful day when your worship, dear master mine, went down to the other world, and an unlucky moment when you met with Señor Montesinos, who has sent you back to us like this. You are well enough here above in your full senses, such as God had given you, delivering maxims and giving advice at every turn, and not as you are now, talking the greatest nonsense that can be imagined. As I know thee, Sancho, said Don Quixote, I heed not thy words. Nor I your worship, said Sancho, whether you beat me or kill me, for those I have spoken, and will speak if you don't correct and mend your own. But tell me, while we are still at peace, how or by what did you recognize the lady our mistress? If you spoke to her, what did you say, and what did she answer? I recognize her, said Don Quixote, by her wearing the same garment she wore when thou didst point her out to me. I spoke to her, but she did not utter a word in reply. On the contrary, she turned her back on me and took to flight at such a pace that crossbow bolt could not have overtaken her. I wished to follow her, and would have done so had not Montesinos recommended me not to take the trouble, as it would be useless, particularly as the time was drawing near when it would be necessary for me to quit the cavern. He told me, moreover, that in course of time he would let me know how he and Belerma and Durandarte and all those who were there were to be disenchanted. But of all I saw and observed down there, what gave me most pain was that while Montesinos was speaking to me, one of the two companions of the hapless Dulcinea approached me on one without my having seen her coming, and with tears in her eyes said to me in a low and agitated voice, My lady Dulcinea del Toboso kisses your worship's hands, and entreats you to do her the favor of letting her know how you are, and being in great need, she also entreats your worship as earnestly as she can to be so good as to lend her 6 reals, or as much as you have about you, on this new dimity petticoat that I have here, and she promises to repay them very speedily. I was amazed and taken aback by such a message, and turning to Señor Montesinos, I asked him, Is it possible, Señor Montesinos, that persons of distinction under enchantment can be in need? To which he replied, Believe me, Señor Don Quixote, that which is called need is to be met with everywhere, and penetrates all quarters and reaches of everyone, and does not spare even the enchanted. And as the lady Dulcinea del Toboso sends to beg those 6 reals, and the pledge is to all appearance a good one, there is nothing for it but to give them to her, for no doubt she must be in some great straits. I will take no pledge of her, I replied, nor yet can I give her what she asks, for all I have is 4 reals, which I gave, for they were those which thou, Sancho, gavest me the other day to bestow in alms upon the poor I met along the road. And I said, Tell your mistress, my dear, that I am grieved to the heart because of her distresses, and wish I was a foucar to remedy them. And what I would and that I would have her know that I cannot be, and ought not be, in health while deprived of the happiness of seeing her and enjoying her discreet conversation, and that I implore her as honestly as I can to allow herself to be seen and addressed by this her captive servant and forlorn knight. Tell her, too, that when she least expects it, she will hear it announced that I have made an oath and vow after the fashion of that which the Marquis de Mantua made to avenge his nephew Baldwin when he found out at the point of death in the heart of the mountains. When he found him at the point of death in the heart of the mountains, which was not to eat bread off a tablecloth or other trifling matters which he added until he had avenged him. I will make the same to take no rest, and to roam the 7 regions of the earth more thoroughly than the Infante Don Pedro of Portugal ever roamed them, until I have disenchanted her. All that and more you owe me, my lady, the damsels answered to me, and taking the 4 reals, instead of making me a curtsy, she cut a caper, springing 2 full yards. Oh, hello! Springing 2 full yards into the air. Oh, blessed God! Exclaimed Sancho aloud at this. Is it possible that such things can be in the world? And that enchanters and enchantments can have such power in it as to have changed my master's right senses into a craze so full of absurdity? Oh, Signor, for God's sake, consider yourself, have a care for your honor, and give no credit to this silly stuff that has left you scant and short of wits. Thou talkest in this way because thou lovest me, Sancho. said Don Quixote, and not being experienced in the things of the world, everything that has some difficulty about it seems to thee. Oh, I'm also certainly enjoying the title. It's I'd say it's a very fun time. I especially just liked a few chapters back. The whole wedding trick was very nice. Let me see here. And not being experienced in the things of the world, everything that has some difficulty about it seems to thee impossible, but time will pass. As I said before, and I will tell thee some of the things I saw down there, which will make thee believe what I have related now, the truth of which admits of neither reply nor question. Yeah, we're up to, what is this, chapter 24? Well, chapter 24 of the second volume, which means that I think we've only got 50-odd pages to go now. Wait, 50? Yeah, 50, I want to say. I am gonna have a quick sip of water here. Okay, this one's a little shorter chapter. But yeah, I think the plan is we're going to at least get to chapter 28. Oh man, I forgot to put on my overlay. Hold on. It was very silly of me. No, I suppose maybe it looks a little nicer. Either way. Yeah, I was doing a little bit of recording. I was testing my my live 2D model last night. We're still working on what's the word? On the rigging part, so it's needs a little more time in the oven, we'll say. But anyhow, chapter 24. Wherein are related 1,000 trifling matters as trivial as they are necessary to the right understanding of this great history. He who translated this great history from the original written by its first author, Cid Hamit Benengeli, says that on coming to the chapter giving the adventures of the cave of Montesinos, he found written on the margin of it in Hamit's own hand these exact words. I cannot conceive or persuade myself that everything that is written in the preceding chapter could have precisely happened to the valiant Don Quixote, and for this reason, that all the adventures have occurred up to the present have been possible and probable, but as for this one of the cave, I see no way of accepting it as true, as it passes all reasonable bounds. For me to believe that Don Quixote could lie, he being the most truthful gentleman and noblest knight of his time, is impossible. He would not have told a lie, though he were shot to death with arrows. On the other hand, I reflect that he related and told the story with all the circumstances detailed, and that he could not, in so short a space, have fabricated such a vast complication of absurdities, if then this adventure seems apocryphal. It is no fault of mine, and so, without affirming its falsehood or its truth, I write it down. Decide for thyself in thy wisdom, reader, for I am not bound, nor is it in my power to do more, though certain it is, they say, at the time of his death he retracted, and said he had invented it, thinking it matched and tallied with the adventures he had read of in his histories. And then he goes on to say, the cousin was amazed as well at Sancho's boldness as at the patience of his master, and concluded that good temper the latter displayed arose from the happiness he felt at seeing his lady Dulcinea. Sorry, just a little stretch. Oh, alright, let's see here. Even enchanted as she was, because otherwise the words and language Sancho had addressed to him deserved a thrashing, for indeed he seemed to him to have been rather impudent to his master, to whom he now observed, I, Señor Don Quixote of La Mancha, look upon the time I spent in travelling with your worship as very well employed, for I have gained 4 things in the course of it. The first is that I have made your acquaintance, which I consider great good fortune. The second, that I have learned what the cave of Montesinos contains, together with the transformations of the of Guadiana, yeah, and of the lakes of Ruidera, which will be of use to me for the Spanish obit that I have in hand. The third, to have discovered the antiquity of cards, that they were in use at least in the time of Charlemagne, as may be inferred from the words you say Durandarte uttered when, at the end of that long spell, while Montesinos was talking to him, he woke up and said, "Patience and shuffle." This phrase, an expression he could not have learned while he was enchanted, but only before he had just become, only before he had become so, in France and in the time of the aforesaid Emperor Charlemagne. And this demonstration is just the thing for me for that other book I am writing, the supplement to Polydary Virgil on the invention of antiquities. For I believe he never thought of inserting that of cards in his book, as I mean to do in mine. It will be a matter of great importance, particularly where I can cite so grave and veracious an authority as Signor Durandarte. And the fourth thing is that I have ascertained the source of the river Guadiana, heretofore unknown to mankind. "Well, you are right," said Don Quixote, "but I should like to know, if by God's favor they grant you a license to print those books of yours, which I doubt, to whom do you mean to dedicate them?" "Why, there are lords and grandees in Spain to whom they can be dedicated," said the cousin. "Oh, not many," said Don Quixote, "not that they are unworthy of it, but because they do not care to accept books and incur the obligation of making the return that seems due to the author's labor and courtesy. One prince I know who makes up for all the rest, and more. How much more, if I venture to say, perhaps I should stir up envy in many a noble breast. But let this stand over for some more convenient time, and let us go and look for some place to shelter ourselves in tonight." "Not far from this," said the cousin, "there is a hermitage, where there lives a hermit, who they say was a soldier, and who has a reputation of being a good Christian, and a very intelligent and charitable man. Close to the hermitage he has a small house which he built at his own cost, but though small it is large enough for the reception of guests." Has this hermit any hens, do you think?" asked Sancho. "Few hermits are without them," said Don Quixote, "for those we see nowadays are not like the hermits of the Egyptian deserts, who are clad in palm leaves and lived on the roots of the earth. But do not think that by praising these I am disparaging the others. All I mean to say is that the penances of those of the present day do not come up to the asceticism and austerity of former times. But it does not follow from this that they are not all worthy. At least I think them so, and at the worst the hypocrite who pretends to be good does less harm than the open sinner." At this point they saw approaching the spot where they stood a man on foot, proceeding at a rapid pace, and beating a mule loaded with lances and halberds. When he came up to them, he saluted them, and passed on without stopping. Don Quixote called to him, "Well, stay, good fellow, you seem to be making more haste than suits that mule." "I cannot stop, señor," answered the man, "for the arms you see I carry here are to be used tomorrow, so I must not delay. God be with you. But if you want to know what I am carrying them for, I mean to lodge tonight at the inn that is beyond the hermitage, and if you be going the same road you will find me there, and I will tell you some curious things. Once more, God be with you." And he urged on his mule at such a pace that Don Quixote had no time to ask him what the curious things were that he meant to tell them. And as he was somewhat inquisitive and always tortured by his anxiety to learn something new, he decided to set out at once, and go and pass the night at the inn instead of stopping at the hermitage, where the cousin would have them halt. Accordingly they mounted, and all three took the direct road for the inn, which they reached a little before nightfall. On the road the cousin proposed they should go up to the hermitage to drink a sup. The instant Sancho heard this, he steered his dapple towards it, and Don Quixote and the cousin did the same. But it seems Sancho's bad luck so ordered it that the hermit was not at home, for so a sub-hermit they found in the hermitage told them. A sub-hermit? I didn't realize that there was a hermit hierarchy. Criminy, where was I? They called for some of the best. She replied that her master had none, but if they liked cheap water, she would give it with great pleasure. If I found any water, said Sancho, there were wells along the road where I could have had enough of it. Camacho's wedding and plentiful house of Don Diego. How often do I miss you? Leaving the hermitage, they pushed on towards the inn, and a little further they came upon a youth who was pacing along in front of them at no great speed, so that they overtook him. He carried a sword over his shoulder and slung it on a budget or bundle of his clothes, apparently. Probably his breeches or pantaloons, and his cloak and a shirt or two. He had on a short jacket of velvet, with a gloss-like satin on it in places, and he had his shirt out. His stockings were of silk, and his shoes square-toed as they wear them at court. His age might have been 18 or 19. He was of a merry countenance, and to all appearance of an active habit. He went on singing seguidillas to beguile the wearisomeness of the roads. As they came up with him, he was just finishing one, which the cousin got by heart, and they say ran thus: I'm off to the wars for the want of peace. Oh, had I but money, I'd show more sense. The first to address him was Don Quixote, who said, You travel very airily, Sir Gallant. Whither bound, may we ask, if it is your pleasure to tell us? To which the youth replied, The heat and my poverty are the reason for my traveling so airily, and it is to the wars that I am bound. Oh, how poverty? Asked Don Quixote. The heat one can understand. Señor, replied the youth, in this bundle I carry velvet pantaloons to match this jacket. If I wear them out on the road, I shall not be able to make a decent appearance in them in the city. And I have not the wherewithal to buy others, and so for this reason, as well as to keep myself cool, I am making my way in this fashion to overtake some companies of infantries that are not 12 leagues off, in which I shall enlist, and there will be no want of baggage trains to travel with after that to the place of embarkation. Which they say... hello. There we go. Which they say shall be Carthagenia. Carthagenia, yeah. I'd rather have the king for a master and serve him in the wars than serve a court pauper. And did you get any bounty now? Asked the cousin. If I had been in the service of some grandee of Spain or personage of distinction, replied the youth, I should have been safe to get it. For that is the advantage of serving good masters, that out of the servants' hall men come to be ancients or captains, or get a good pension. But I, to my misfortune, always served place hunters and adventurers, whose keep and wages were so miserable and scanty that half went into paying for the starching of one's collars. It would be a miracle indeed if a page volunteer ever got anything like a reasonable bounty. And tell me, for heaven's sake, asked Don Quixote, is it possible, my friend, that all the time you served you never got any livery? They gave me 2, replied the page, but just as when one quits a religious community before making profession, they strip him of the dress of the order and give him back his own clothes, so did my masters return me mine, for as soon as the business on which they came to court was finished, they went home and took back the liveries they had given merely for show. What's Spilosaria? Spilosaria. Hold on, I need to... Spilosaria. You know what, I might just... Hold on, let me... There it is. I'll just copy and paste that, because I want to know what this one is. Meaningless or stinginess? Or meanness? Ah, I see. As an Italian would say, said Don Quixote. But for all that, consider yourself happy in having left court with as worthy an object as you have. For there is nothing on earth more honorable or profitable than serving, first of all, God, and then one's king and natural lord, particularly in the profession of arms, by which, if not more wealth, at least more honor is to be won than by letters. as I have said many a time, for though letters may have founded more great houses than arms, still those founded by arms have I know not what superiority over those founded by letters, and a certain splendor belonging to them distinguishes them above all. And bear in mind what I am now about to say to you, for it will be of great use and comfort to you in time of trouble. It is, not to let your mind dwell on the adverse chances that may befall you, for the worst of all is death, and if it be a good death, the best of all is to die. They asked Julius Caesar, the valiant Roman emperor, what was the best death. He answered, that which is unexpected, which comes suddenly and unforeseen, and though he answered like a pagan, and one without knowledge of the true God, and yet, as far as sparing our feelings is concerned, he was right. For suppose you are killed in the first engagement or skirmish, whether by a cannonball or blown up by a mine, what matters it? It is only dying, and all is over, and according to Terence, a soldier shows better dead in battle than alive and safe in flight. And the good soldier wins fame in proportion as he is obedient to his captains and those in command over him. And remember, my son, that it is better for the soldier to smell of gunpowder than of civet, and that if old age should come upon you in this honorable calling, that you may be covered with wounds and crippled and lame, it will not come upon you without honor, and that such as poverty cannot lessen, especially now that provisions are being made for supporting and relieving old and disabled soldiers. For it is not right to deal with them after the fashion of those who set free and get rid of their black slaves when they are so old and useless, and turning them out of their houses under the pretense of making them free, making them slaves to hunger from which they cannot expect to be released except by death. But for the present I won't say more than get ye up behind me on my horse as far as the inn, and sup with me there, and tomorrow you shall pursue your journey, and God give you as good speed as your intentions deserve. The page did not accept the invitation to mount, though he did that to supper at the inn, and here they say Sancho said to himself, God be with you for a master. It is possible that a man who can say things so many and so good as he had said just now can say that he saw the impossible absurdities he reports about the cave of Montesinos. Well, well, we shall see. And now, just as night was falling, they reached the inn, and it was not without satisfaction that Sancho perceived his master took it for a real inn, and not for a castle as usual. The instant they entered, Don Quixote asked the landlord after the man with the lances and halberds, and was told that he was in the stable seeing to his mule, which was what Sancho and the cousin proceeded to do for their beasts, giving the best manger and the best place in the stable for Rocinante. Let me see here. This one's going to be quite the girthy chapter. Let me grab a little extra water. Chapter 25, wherein is set down the braying adventure and the droll one of the puppet showman, together with the memorable divinations of the divining ape. Don Quixote's bread would not bake, as the common saying is, until he had heard and learned the curious things promised by the man who carried the arms. He went to seek him where the innkeeper said he was, and having found him, bade him say now, at any rate, what he had to say in answer to the question he had asked him on the road. The tale of my wonders must be taken more leisurely and not standing, said the man. Let me finish foddering my beast, good sir, and then I'll tell you things that will astonish you. Oh, don't wait for that, said Don Quixote. I'll help you in everything. And so he did, sifting the barley for him and cleaning out the manger, a degree of humility which made the other feel bound to tell him with a good grace what he had asked. So, seating himself on a bench with Don Quixote beside him, the cousin, the page, Sancho Panza, and the landlord for a senate and an audience, he began his story in this way. You must know that in a village 4 leagues and a half from this inn, It so happened that one of the regidors, by the tricks and roguery of a servant girl of his, it is too long a tale to tell, lost an ass, and though he did all he possibly could to find it, it was all to no purpose. A fortnight might have gone by, so the story goes, since the ass had been missing, when, as the regidor who had lost it was standing in the plaza, another regidor of the same town said to him, "Pay me for good news, gossip, your ass has turned up." "That I will, and well, gossip," said the other, "but tell us, where has he turned up?" "In the forest," said the finder. "I saw him this morning without pack saddles or harness of any sort, and so lean that it went to one's heart to see him. I tried to drive him before me and bring him to you, but he was already so wild and shy that when I went near him he made off into the thickest part of the forest. If you have a mind that we two should go back and look for him, let me put up this she-ass at my house, and I'll be back at once." "You'll be doing me a great kindness," said the owner of the ass. "I'll try to pay it back in the same coin." It is with all these circumstances, and in the very same way I am telling it now, that those who know all about the matter tell the story. Well, then the two regidors set off on foot, arm in arm, for the forest, and coming to the place where they hoped to find the ass, they could not see him, nor was he to be seen anywhere about, search as they might. Seeing then that there was no sign of him, the regidor who had seen him said to the other, "Look here, gossip, a plan has occurred to me, by which beyond a doubt we shall manage to discover the animal, even if he is stowed away in the bowels of the earth, not to say the forest. Here it is. I can bray to perfection, and if you can ever so little, the thing's as good as done." "Ever so little, did you say, gossip?" And said the other, "By God, I will not give it to anybody, not even to the asses themselves." "You'll soon see," said the second regidor. "For my plan is that you should go one side of the forest and I the other, so as to go all around it, and every now and then you will bray and I will bray, and it cannot be but that the ass will hear us and answer us if he is in the forest." To which the owner of the ass replied, "It's an excellent plan, I declare, gossip, and worthy of your great genius," and the two separating as agreed. It so fell out that they brayed almost at the same moment, and each, deceived by the braying of the other, ran to look, fancying the ass had turned up at last. When they came in sight of one another, said the loser, "Is it possible, gossip, that it was not my ass that brayed?" "No, it was I," said the other. "Well, then, I can tell you, gossip," said the ass's owner, "that you and the ass there, it is not an atom of difference as far as braying goes, for I have never in my life saw or heard anything more natural." "Those praises and compliments belong to you more justly than to me, gossip," said the inventor of the plan, "for, by the God that made me, you might give a couple of brays odd to the best, most finished brayer in the world. The tone you have got is deep, and your voice is well kept up as to time and pitch, and your finishing notes come thick and fast. In fact, I own myself beaten, and yield the palm to you, and give it to you in this rare accomplishment." "Well, then," said the owner, "I'll set a higher value on myself for the future, and consider that I know something, as I have an excellence of some sort, for though I always thought I brayed well, I never supposed I came upon to the pitch of perfection you say." "And I say, too," said the second, "that there are rare gifts going to loss in the world, and that they are ill bestowed upon those who do not know how to make use of them." "Ours," said the owner of the ass, "unless it is in cases like this we have now in hand, cannot be of any service to us. And even in this God grant they may be of some use." And so saying, they separated, and took to their braying once more, but every instant they were deceiving one another, and coming to meet one another again, until they arranged, by way of countersign, so as to know it was they and not the ass, to give two brays, one after the other. In this way, doubling the brays at every step, they made the complete circuit of the forest, but the lost ass never gave them an answer, or even the sign of one. How could the poor, ill-starred brute have answered, when in the thickest part of the forest they found him devoured by wolves? As soon as they saw him, his owner said, "I was wondering he did not answer, but if he wasn't dead, he'd have brayed when he had heard us, or he'd have been no ass." But for the sake of having heard you bray to such perfection, gossip, I count the trouble I have taken to look for him well bestowed, even though I have found him dead." "It's in a good hand, gossip," said the other. "If the abbot sings well, the acolyte is not much behind him." So they returned disconsolate and hoarse to their village, where they told their friends, neighbors, and acquaintances what had befallen them in their search for the ass, each crying upon the other's perfection in braying. The whole story came to be known and spread through the village of the neighborhood, and the devil who never sleeps, with his love for sowing dissensions and scattering discord everywhere, blowing mischief about and making quarrels out of nothing, contrived to make the people of the town fall to braying whenever they saw anyone from our village, as if to throw the braying of our regidors in our teeth. Then the boys took to it, which was the same thing, for it is as getting into the hands and mouths of all the devils of hell, and braying spread from one town to another in such a way that the men of the braying town are as easy to be known and as blacks are to be known from whites. And the unlucky joke has gone so far that several times he scoffed, having come out in arms and in a body to do battle with the scoffers, and neither king nor rook, fear nor shame, can mend matters. Tomorrow, or the day after, I believe, the men of my town, that is, of the braying town, are going to take the field against another village 2 leagues away from ours, one of those that persecute us the most. And that we may turn out well prepared, I have brought these lances and halberds you have seen. These are the curious things I told you I had to tell, and if you don't think them so, I have got no others." And with this the worthy fellow brought his story to a close. Just at that moment there came in at the gate of the inn a man clad entirely in chamois leather, hose, breeches, and doublet, who said in a loud voice, "Signor host, have you room? Here's the divining ape and the show of the release of Melisendra just coming." "Oddsbody," said the landlord. "Why, it's Master Pedro! We're in for a grand night." I forgot to mention that the said Master Pedro had his left eye and nearly half his cheek covered with a patch of green taffety, showing that something ailed all that side. "Your worship is welcome, Master Pedro," continued the landlord, "but where are the ape and the show? For I don't see them." "Oh, they are close at hand," said he in chamois leather. "But I came on first to know if there was any room. I'd make the Duke of Alva himself clear out to make room for Master Pedro," said the landlord. "Bring in the ape and the show. There's company in the inn tonight that will pay to see and the cleverness of the ape." "So be it by all means," said the man with the patch. "I'll lower the price and be well satisfied if I only pay my expenses. And now I'll go back and hurry with the cart with the ape and the show." And with this he went out of the inn. Don Quixote at once asked the landlord what his Master Pedro was, and what was the show, and what was the ape he had with him. Which the landlord replied, "This is a famous puppet showman, who for some time past has been going about this Mancha de Aragon, exhibiting a show of the release of Melisendra by the famous Don Gayfrios. Gayfrios. One of the best represented stories that have ever been in this part of the kingdom for many a year. He was also with him an ape with the most extraordinary gift ever seen in an ape or imagined in any human being. For if you ask him anything, he listens attentively to the question, and then jumps on his master's shoulder, and, pressing close his ear, tells him the answer, which Master Pedro then delivers. He says a great deal more about things past than things to come, and though he does not always hit the truth in every case, more times is he not far wrong, so that he makes us fancy he has got the devil in him. He gets 2 reals for every question if the ape answers. I mean, if his master answers for him after he whispered into his ear. And so it is believed that this same Master Pedro is very rich. He is a gallant man, as they say in Italy, and good company, and leads the finest life in the world, talks more than 6, drinks more than a dozen, and all by his tongue, and his ape, and his show. Master Pedro now came back, and in a cart followed the show and the ape, a big one without a tail, and with buttocks as bare as felt, but not vicious looking. As soon as Don Quixote saw him, he asked him, "Can you tell me, Sir Fortune Teller, what fish do we catch, and how will it be with us? See, here are my 2 reals, and he bade Sancho give them to Master Pedro. But he answered for the ape, and said, Señor, this animal does not give any answer or information touching things that are to come. Of things past he knows something, and more or less things of the present." "Oh, yad," said Sancho. "I would not give a farthing to be told what's past with me, but for who knows that better than I do myself, and to pay for being told what I know would be mighty foolish. But as you know things present, here are my 2 reals, and tell me, most excellent Sir Ape, what is my wife Teresa Panza doing now, and what is she diverting herself with?" Master Pedro refused the money, saying, "I will not receive payment in advance, or until the service has been first rendered." And then with his right hand he gave a couple of slaps on his left shoulder, and with one spring the ape perched himself upon it, and putting his mouth to his master's ear, began chattering his teeth rapidly. And having kept this up as long as one could be saying a credo, with another spring he brought himself to the ground. At the same instant Master Pedro ran in great haste, and fell upon his knees before Don Quixote, and embracing his legs exclaimed, "These legs do I embrace, as would embrace the 2 pillars of Hercules, O illustrious reviver of knight-errantry, so long consigned to oblivion! O never yet duly extolled knight, Don Quixote of La Mancha, courage of the faint-hearted, prop of the tottering, arm of the fallen, staff and counsel of all who are unfortunate." Don Quixote was thunderstruck, Sancho astounded, the cousin staggered, the page astonished, the man from the braying town agape, the landlord in perplexity, and in short everyone amazed at the words of the puppet showman, who went on to say, "And thou worthy Sancho Panza, the best squire and squire to the best knight in the world, be of good cheer, for thy good wife Teresa is well, and she is at this moment hackling a pound of flax, and more by token she has at her left hand a jug with a broken spout, that holds a good drop of wine, with which she solaces herself at her work." "That I can well believe," said Sancho. "She is a lucky one, and if it was not for her jealousy, I would not change her for the giantess Andandona, who by my master's account was a very clever and worthy woman. My Teresa is one of those who won't let themselves want for anything, though their heirs may have to pay for it." "Now I declare," said Don Quixote, "he who reads much and travels much sees and knows a great deal. I say so because what amount of persuasion could have persuaded me that there are apes in the world that can divine, as I have now seen with my own eyes? For I am the very Don Quixote of La Mancha this worthy animal refers to. Though he has gone too far in my praise, for whatever I may be, I thank heaven that it has endowed me with a tender and compassionate heart, always disposed to do good to all and harm to none. If I had money," said the page, "I would ask Señor Ape what will happen to me in the peregrination I am making." To this Master Pedro, who had by this time risen from Don Quixote's feet, replied, "I have already said that this little beast gives no answer as to the future, but if he did, not having money would be of no consequence, for to oblige Señor Don Quixote, here present, I would give up all the profits in the world. And now, because I have promised it, and to afford him pleasure, I will set up my show and offer entertainment to all who are in the inn, without any charge whatever." As soon as he heard this, the landlord, delighted beyond measure, pointed out a place where the show might be fixed, which was done at once. Don Quixote was not very well satisfied with the divinations of the ape, as he did not think it proper that an ape should divine anything, either past or future. So while Master Pedro was arranging the show, he retired with Sancho into a corner of the stable, where, without being overheard by anyone, he said to him, "Look here, Sancho. I have been seriously thinking over this ape's extraordinary gift, and have come to the conclusion that beyond doubt this Master Pedro, his master, has a pact, tacit or express, with the devil." "If the packet is express from the devil," said Sancho, "it must be a very dirty packet, no doubt. But what good can it do Master Pedro to have such packets?" Thou dost not understand me, Sancho, said Don Quixote. I only mean that he must have made some compact with the devil to infuse this power into the ape, that he may get his living, and after he has grown rich he will give him his soul, which is what the enemy of mankind wants. This I am led to believe by observing that the ape only answers about things past or present, and the devil's knowledge extends no further. For the future he knows only by guesswork, and that not always, for it is reserved for God alone to know the times and the seasons, and for him there is neither past nor future, all is present. This being as it is clear that the ape speaks by the spirit of the devil, and I am astonished that they have not denounced him to the holy office, and put him to the question, and forced it out of him by whose virtue it is that he divines. Because it is certain that this ape is not an astrologer, neither his master nor he sets up, or knows now how, or knows how to set up those figures they call judiciary, which are now so common in Spain that there is not a jade or page or old cobbler that will not undertake to set up a figure as readily as to pick up a knave of cards from the ground, bringing to naught the marvelous truth of the science by their lies and ignorance. I know of a lady who asked one of these figure schemers whether her little lapdog would be in pup and would breed, and how many and of what color the little pups would be, to which Signor Astrologer, having set up his figure, made answer that the bitch would be in pup, and would drop 3 pups, one green, another bright red, and one party colored, provided she was conceived between 11 and 12 either of the day or night, and on a Monday or Saturday. But as things turned out, 2 days after this the bitch died of a surfeit, and Signor Planet Ruler had the credit of all over the place of being a most profound astrologer, as most of these planet rulers have. What is a surfeit? Surfeit? Hold on. An excessive amount of something. I see. Still, said Sancho, I would be glad if your worship would make Master Pedro ask his ape whether what happened to your worship in the cave of Montesinos is true, for, begging your worship's pardon, I, for my part, take it to have all been flam and lies, or at any rate something you dreamt. That may be, replied Don Quixote. However, I will do what you suggest, though I have my own scruples about it. At this point, Master Pedro came up in quest of Don Quixote, to tell him the show was now ready, and to come and see it, for it was worth seeing. Don Quixote explained his wish, and begged him to ask his ape at once, to tell him whether certain things which had happened to him in the cave of Montesinos were dreams or realities, for to him they appeared to partake of both. Upon this, Master Pedro, without answering, went back to fetch the ape, and having placed it in front of Don Quixote and Sancho, said, See here, Señor Ape, this gentleman wishes to know whether certain things which happened to him in the cave called the cave of Montesinos were false or true. On him making the usual sign, the ape mounted his left shoulder and seemed to whisper in his ear, and Master Pedro said at once, The ape says that the things you saw or that happened to you in that cave are part of them false, part true, and that he only knows this, and no more as regards the question. But if your worship wishes to know, on Friday next he will answer all that may be asked of him, for his virtue is at present exhausted, and will not return to him till Friday, as he has said. Did I not say, Signor, said Sancho, that I could not bring myself to believe that all your worship said about the adventures in the caves were true, or even the half of it? The course of events will tell, Sancho, replied Don Quixote. Time, that discloses all things, leaves nothing that it does not drag into the light of day, though it be buried in the bosom of the earth. But enough of that for the present. Let us go and see Master Pedro's show, for I am sure there must be something novel in it. Something, said Master Pedro. This show of mine has 60,000 novel writings in it. Has 60,000 novel things in it. Let me tell you, Signor Don Quixote, it is one of the best worth-seeing things in the world this day. But operibus credite et non verbis. And now let's get to work, for it is growing late and we have a great deal to do and to say and show. Hold on, let me see here. Oh, Pitibus. Need to see what this is. I'm not really much of a Latin speaker myself. But believe in deeds and not words. Fascinating. Anyway. And now let's get to work, for it is growing late and we have a great deal to do and to say and show. Don Quixote and Sancho obeyed him and went to where the show was already put up and uncovered, and set all around and lighted wax tapers, which made it look splendid and bright. When they came to it, Master Pedro ensconced himself inside it, for it was he who had to work the puppets. And a boy, a servant of his, posted himself outside to act as a showman and explain the mysteries of the exhibition, having a wand in his hand to point to the figures as they came out. And so all who were in the inn being arranged in front of the show, some of them standing, and Don Quixote, Sancho, the page, and cousin accommodated with the best places, the interpreter began to say what he will hear or see who reads or hears the next chapter. Chapter 26. So I'm probably going to call it here. My throat's getting a little gassed. So I need to go and do some grocery shopping because I need food. I'm in dire need of food. There we go. Specifically eggs. So I'll tell you what. Let me go and crack open my Strim manager, and I will see. Let me see here. Let's do this real quick. Let's see. Anyone to scatter to the winds? Yeah, not particularly. Either way, tonight I will toss together a poll on my Twitter, which I believe you can see on my twitter.com. Let me just triple check that real quick. Why, yes, you can double check on my twitter.com website. Profile, that's the word. Anyway, yes, I think we've got all that done and dusted. So I am going to scatter to the winds. Thank you all very much for attending. I do sincerely appreciate it. And like I said, I will throw up a Twitter poll, probably 2 Twitter polls. One for my dessert of choice, because I've got a bunch of heavy cream that may or may not be like on the way out in like a week or so. And then we will also figure out what game we're going to be playing next on the docket, because I've still got some things that I need to finish up, like the 9 souls. Granted, though, I think we're at like the towards the end on that one. But yes. In fact, I'll probably try and round out 9 souls tomorrow. Yeah, I think that's going to be the plan. We'll round out 9 souls tomorrow, so hopefully that'll be all done and dusted, and we won't have to take a gander at that one again for a hot minute. Yeah, and then we'll figure out what's next on the docket. So, like I said, thank you all very much for attending. I do sincerely appreciate it. Let me just get back over to the stream manager, and I will figure out where we're going to send you all off to. All right. So let's go do a quick looky-loo. If anyone reading anything fun. Curious case of friendship. Well, I'll tell you what, actually. I will bounce you over to one Sarah K. Looks like they are going through the NaNoWriMo, which is it's basically a short story writing thing. Looks like they've been up for about... It looks like they've been up for a hot minute. So I'll tell you what, I'm gonna bounce you guys over that way. Because it looks like, yeah, they're gonna be burning on through until the end. Looks like they've got 12,000 odd words to write, or at the very least, allegedly. So I'm gonna bounce you guys over that way, and I will be seeing you tomorrow. Da 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 da.